Director Crum,
Yes.
Yeah.
Director Keefe, Director Nasser,
Here.
Director Witherell,
Here.
Chairperson Smant.
Here.
At this time, I would ask for a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye.
Maybe I can just get, just for everyone's information, we do have 2 board members via Zoom. You're not going to see them up there because we've shared the screen of what we're talking about. They're seeing this, but you're not going to see their little picture. They see you, all right? The only way we can do that is to take up portion of the screen for their picture that is, then you're not going to be able to see the video is clearly. So they are seeing the same presentation that you're seeing. And they are also seeing you. All right. But if we start putting all of their pictures up there, then you're not going to be able to see the size of the screen. So, we are broadcast. There's public members on watching you as well via the camera. And, you're also, we're also broadcasting what you see on the screen. Any questions with that? And just a reminder again, if you don't hit your button and when you're speaking, the public and Jack and Todd will not be able to hear you. All right. So you need to, we just had votes. The votes were not heard because you didn't hit the mic.
Dave, you want me to jump in?
Yeah, why don't I think you all remember Tim from the last time he was here. Tim Blodgett from Hometown Connections is going to be walking us through this facilitation for the board, a kickoff for our strategic planning issues. And I think he has a presentation. I know he's talked with all of you individually before this time, I believe, all of them, right? And he's also talked to staff members to gain some insight into what they feel. All of the executive team, which is all here, but Lynn is on her to limit the number in this room to 10. So Lynn is also, or limited to the number of tables that we can fit in here and still maintain distance. So Lynn is in her office on Zoom also. So I think with that, Tim, I'll turn it over to you and he's going to facilitate the process.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, board, for the opportunity to be with you today and staff. It's good to be back. It's been a few years. So it's good to be back with you. And what I wanted to do maybe first is just kind of walk through the agenda and maybe set the objectives of this morning and early afternoon with our time with the board here. And you can see what I've got up here on the screen is we'll just go through some quick introductions. Going to have a little bit of fun with that, as you'll see. Then we're going to, I wanted to give you a brief update of the business readiness risk assessment that we went through. My colleague Sharice Swanson led that exercise and talk a little bit about that. We'll give a brief update on the industry, just what we're seeing on the national scale. By no means are we Michigan or Grand Haven experts, so I don't want to sweat that at all because I'm not. I'll leave that up to you all and your staff. But I'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing trending across the nation, specific to the electric utility industry. And then I'll ask staff to chime in as it relates to what's going on regional and locally as well. It's always important to have that dialogue ahead of time, especially for a strategic planning session as you're thinking out for the next 5 years. So we'll do that. Then we're going to do a quick update on the current plan. And Dave's going to talk a little bit about, we've got some slides in here as well, but Dave will talk a little bit about just, what the previous mission, what the previous values were, and the previous strategic priorities. And I always like to say that when you're going through and updating a plan, doesn't mean you have to change everything, but you definitely want to review things. And so that's what we'll kick off with. That front end of that process will be important for the board to have input on as we go through. Because as you know, the board's role really in strategic planning is setting that vision. It's out, good boards, good governance is out in front of the organization. It's setting vision out into the future, sticking that stake in the ground, if you will. And then staff develops the means of how to get there. So it's important to have that input from the board in that. And then we'll go into, as Dave mentioned, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to speak with each one of you individually. I had a chance to talk to all 5 board members. I had a chance to talk to all 5 executive staff members of your leadership team. So what you're going to see is I'm going to present to you a summary of those conversations. So you're not going to see your exact quotes within that, but what you're going to see is a summary. And I'm going to show board and staff separate so you can just see, because I think it's very important, all the organizations, especially in strategic planning, but just in general, it's very important to see if there's alignment between boards and staff, and if there's not, to have some dialogue around that. So that's why we'll go through that. Then we'll get right into the process. So we'll go into the strategic planning process. I know we only have you about 3 hours. I know, Larry, I believe you're leaving at noon. So from that standpoint, want to make sure we maximize our time here this morning with you all in early afternoon. Thereafter, what we'll do is, as you look down here, and the agenda is, I think I can control this. Yep. So then this afternoon, after complete the wrap up with the board, I'll spend time with staff this afternoon, and then tomorrow morning as well, as we go through this first session of the strategic plan. So any questions or comments in regards to the agenda? And Jack and Todd, I know you're remote. I can't see you, but I trust that you'll jump in if you have any questions or comments, and I'll try to bring you in every once in a while, or just ask every once in a while, just to make sure you're still with us as well. Rob can see them as well. Rob can see them. Okay. So Rob can verify they are there? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay. Who comprises the board team?
The board team are the 5 board members, plus Dave, from the standpoint of just the team. I mean, staff can listen in.
But you're showing the board team being here from 2:30 to 5.
Let's see. I've got that's my well, on the 2:30 to 5. That's just the staff team there. So yeah, we've got I think we've got the board team slated up until 2 o'clock. We'll go from 10 to noon, and then we will have a lunch break, and then come back from 1 or whatever lunch accommodations are. If we can start earlier, we will, but we'll be wrapped up no later than 2.
Just so you know, I have to leave at 1 o'clock, which was the published time this meeting would end.
Okay. All right. Well, we can work through lunch as well with that. So we'll make that work. I'm nothing if not flexible, John. So I just want you to know that. Okay. Any other questions? So let's then I would like to jump over here, and we're going to open the slide deck here. And Rob, I think you're mirroring what I'm doing here, so people virtually can see this. So what I'd like to do is, I already framed this, but the purpose of today's meeting really is to get to what are those core strategic priorities and get some alignment around those core strategic priorities for the next 5 years for BLP. That's what we want to make sure that we accomplish today with the presence of the board, and then staff will go work that. And, as I've talked about before, strategic planning, we like to call it a game of pitch and catch. So if you can just visualize, I don't know how many of us play catch these days at our age, but you know, when we were kids and younger, going out and just throwing the ball back and forth. So that's what staff and boards do in a strategic planning process. So that's what you're going to see as we go through this process. Board's going to provide their input, throw the ball back to staff. Staff's going to catch it. Staff's going to work that and then bring that back to the board in the future and throw it back to you and just say, did we capture everything? Are we on the same page? Can we move this thing forward? And then throw it back to staff. They'll move forward and execute it. So that's what we're going to do today. So first, I do have the pleasure of knowing all of you, but I still like to have a little bit of fun with this. So if you could, I'd like to just go around for those here and then for Jack and Todd as well. And just introduce yourself. Again, I know we already had roll call, but give your name, of course, board member, staff. And then if you could participate in any Olympic sport, because, you know, we were supposed to have the Olympics last year, the summer, but now they're going to be this year, hopefully. And so if you could participate in any Olympic sport, what would that be? And it doesn't even have to be an official Olympic sport. You can name your own sport and we'll lobby and see if we can get it into the Olympics. But if you could be in any Olympic sport. So I'm going to start with my left and ladies first. So Renee, would you like to go first? Make sure you put your mic down. You can make one up. Yeah.
Okay, Renee Molyneux. I'm the Administrative Services Manager. And if I were in an Olympic sport, I would probably play softball.
Nice. Okay, great. John?
John Nasser. I'm in my 11th year as a board member. I think my Olympic sport would be curling.
Curling.
Especially one of those people who does the brushing in front of the curling iron as it comes down.
Thank you, John. Jerry?
I'm Jerry Witherell, Vice Chairman. I've been here 16 years this April. My sport would be distance running. I did it all my life until 10 years ago, so I wouldn't change. I've always been a road runner.
Nice. Thanks. Larry?
Larry Keefe, board member, professional tennis.
Professional tennis. Is singles or doubles?
Better at doubles.
Okay, great. Thanks, Larry. Eric?
Eric Booth, Power Supply Manager, and I would pick shooting.
Shooting. Any specific kind?
No.
Okay. I thought, what's that one they call is it the biathlon where they ski and shoot?
That would be cool.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. Rob? Rob, we'll skip you. We're going to come back to you. We got some technical difficulties. Dave?
Dave Walters, General Manager of, probably basketball.
Basketball. Okay. Now for our virtual participants, Jack?
Jack Smith, Chairman of the board, I've been on for approximately 21 years, and the Olympic sport would be baseball.
Baseball. All right. Thank you, Jack. Todd?
I'm Todd Crum. I've been on the board just over a year now. And I guess golf would be what I'd select, even though I'd probably end up being the caddy.
Well, you must be predictable, Todd, because Larry was whispering over here golf when it came to you. So. Good. Well, thank you. And you know, my name's Tim Blodgett. I'm President and CEO of Hometown Connections. And mine would be cornhole. We've got a little neighborhood game of neighbors that all have cornhole boards. And so we get out in the summertime and even warmer days in the winter if we get that luxury, and we play a little cornhole on the weekends. So I think I've mastered it, although I watched a little bit of it when there was no other sport on here last spring in particular. And ESPN had the cornhole championships on, and I'm not that good. So I'm going to have to stick with my current job, I can see. So. Rob?
Rob Shelley, I'm the Engineering and Distribution Manager here at the Board of Light and Power, and my sport would be wrestling.
Wrestling, all right. Very good. Oh yes, Lynn, I am so sorry. Lynn, I would be remiss if we didn't capture you as well. My apologies.
Hello, I'm Lynn Diffel, and I'm the finance manager, and I would probably pick horseback riding.
Horseback riding. Yeah, the ones where they jump the whatever those gates.
No,
Oh,
it's called, or it's more like a showmanship.
oh, okay, yes.
So
Well, in Denver,
show yourself off.
we normally have the rodeo, and they've got those draw horses where they'll pull things and all of that. I could picture you doing that too. Yes, I know. But of course, we didn't have the rodeo. It should be going on right now, but that, along with most other things, have been postponed. So thank you, Lynn, and my apologies for that. Thank you, Renee, for keeping me on track there. All right. Well, that was just a little fun. Just wanted to go through that, and I appreciate everybody's participation. So now you know what not to compete against with your fellow board members and staff, because everybody's probably pretty good at what they named, or at least think they are.
Jim, I think you're a bit modest though, because I think you have a history in basketball as well, don't you?
Well, I do, but I definitely, yeah, I would love to have played basketball in the Olympics, or play basketball in the Olympics, but that's I got a much better shot, Dave, I think, at cornhole.
Now.
Yeah, now. Thank you, though. Well, good. Well, I know everybody's familiar with Hometown, but I just want to give just a brief introduction of who we are. We've changed a little bit in the last 5 years since we've been here. So just to frame a little bit, about who we are. As you all know, we are Public Power. We have been owned by Public Power since our inception, when the American Public Power Association created us back in 1998. And it was to do this very thing. It was to help public power utilities with local control, and help in the areas of strategic planning, management consulting, and other areas. We've had an ownership transition that I'll talk about here in just a second. But since 1998, we have worked with over 900 utilities, community-owned utilities across the country. So I don't say that to brag as much as just to frame. We've got a lot of knowledge on best practices, how others operate, and we like to share that with all of our clients and all of Public Power. But APPA still sees us very much as a collaborative resource in being able to add some purchasing power, sharing best practices to Public Power and to community-owned utilities in general across the country. So very proud of what we've accomplished in the last 23 years. And we also work with a lot of joint action agencies and state associations. So we have a relationship today with your state association here, which is I think co-staffed now with MPPA, your joint action agency. So we've got good relationships at the wholesale level and the statewide levels as well. I mentioned the ownership change back in 2018. And let me even step back further than that. Prior to 2018, APPA and myself and our team at Hometown had been working on better capitalizing Hometown so that we could grow and be in a better position to add even more value to utilities across the country. So we were recruiting joint action agencies across the country. And in the end, we had 5 joint action agencies. You'll see 6 here, but we had 5 joint action agencies back in 2018 that acquired us from APPA. This was a very cordial, within the family acquisition and transition of ownership, but it was to better fund us, because as a trade association, APPA struggled in giving us the appropriate funding to be able to grow, especially in the services area. Not necessarily in the consulting, but in our services and technology space. So AMEA in Alabama, AMP in Ohio, MPUA in Missouri, NCPA in California, and then VEPSA in Vermont were the 5 initial owners as part of that transition. Great Lakes Utilities in Wisconsin came in 2019 and made an acquisition. So just to give you an idea, nothing's changed from our side. We still work with all utilities. But I just wanted to be in transparency, share with you all that we have a new set of owners. Rest assured, too, APPA is still very closely aligned with us. They still have a voting board seat, even though they don't have an equity position in our company anymore. They've got a voting board seat, of which Jeff Haas, their head of member services, represents APPA on that board, with Ursula Shriver as their alternate. So they're still heavily involved and still very influential, and we work just as closely with them as we ever have. On the services side, we're really in 3 areas today. Our management consulting, of course, which I'm here representing, and hopefully perform well for you all here in the next couple of days. And then we've got our managed solution space as well, where we've got an AMI program, and we're standing up and in the midst of growing a cybersecurity program as well, whereby we do, and I'm not going to go through all those, but we're very excited about that. And we do these with our own staff and with with Public Power staff, I should say. And then we still have our third-party endorsement, that third area. So you can see within that we still endorse a lot of just third-party providers that we run through our due diligence process. So just wanted to do a brief intro, just again to frame a little bit about, the background. And since I worked with you 5 years ago, I've had the pleasure of working with many governing boards and staffs since that point in time. So hopefully I've stayed fresh, or hopefully I'm fresher than I was when I was with you 5 years ago. Any questions or comments before we move into the business risk readiness assessment summary? Okay. So what I want to do now, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe everybody had already received the report, the business readiness risk assessment. Easy for me to say. And what I'm not going to go through the entire report, but I do want to just provide a summary of what we did, why we did it, why we went through this, and then at a high level, some of the findings and recommendations coming out of that. You may recall that last time, before we went through the strategic planning process, we went through an organizational checkup, is what we called it. It was a similar process where we did interviews. Some of you participated in that. And really what that does is it kind of, it paints a picture or frames where the utility currently is in our mind as a consultant. Again, we're not the expert on BLP, your staff is, but from the standpoint of just what we saw going through the interviews. We did that back in 2016, and then that became a big part of the SWOT analysis, if you remember, in that strategic plan. This is very similar, although it's a little bit of a different process. It's what we like to call an enhanced version of our organization checkup, but it really is to help identify risk. It helps identify strengths and weaknesses that should be factored in, and opportunities and threats that should be factored into, or at least considered by you all as you go through your strategic planning process. So that's why we went through this process. So I'm just going to do a high level summary and hit on some key points. But as mentioned already, as you look at a business readiness risk assessment, and full disclosure, Cherise Swanson, as I know you, those of you that participated, Cherise Swanson led this process. She joined us last year. And she comes from bigger utility environment. She worked both with a public power utility in Colorado Springs Utilities, and then she worked for Lee County Electric, LCEC, which is one of the larger co-ops, and it's in Fort Myers, Florida. And so she brought in a lot of new blood, if you will, I like to refer to it as. And she is very, as you all probably picked up on, she's very focused and very in depth on process and policy around that, which we'll get into that, but that's where, we think that the Grand Haven has some upside, is in this process and policy area, and we'll talk more about that. So when you look at this, the objectives of this business readiness risk assessment were to provide some insights into the risks, the gaps, and the opportunities for consideration for BLP. And that assists in, as I just talked about, the strategic planning process. It assists in continuing to build your foundation from the standpoint of your processes and policies. And it provides opportunities for alignment, points out maybe some misalignment in the entire organization. So that's the purpose of it. We touched on all these areas, and your staff provided a lot of information. I know we had the opportunity to talk to a couple of the board members as well as part of the interview process. But you can see we try to hit holistically on the organization as we go through this. So we touched on all these areas, and staff provided a lot of information on these areas. And then not only did we have the interviews with a couple of the board members, we had the interviews with the executive team, your leadership team as well. And so the approach we take then is there was an initial questionnaire that went out to staff, and we had the virtual interviews. As you may recall, we did all of this virtually. And then we had the follow-up interviews. We provided then a draft assessment for staff's review. Staff reviewed, provided us feedback on that. We had some good, healthy discussion around some of the areas that we saw. And you know, staff didn't influence or change anything relative to our recommendations and findings. They corrected a few things that where we had misinformation, had misinterpreted the information given to us, but there was nothing, you know, as far as influenced by staff in regards to our assessment and report. And then we provided that final assessment of which you have been provided. And we split them into three categories. We had risks that we think are kind of the highest priority of the organization, where you've got the greatest exposure. We also presented opportunities that you should consider, but they shouldn't be your top priorities. You know, the risk should be. And then considerations, which, you know, are just something to think about, something to consider into the future, but aren't that near as high priority as the other two. So as we got into this, then the first thing we did is, you know, we really wanted to point out and give staff and the board credit for a lot of accomplishments over the last 5 years. When we came in here 5 years ago and did the organization checkup, I don't know if you remember, but there was a laundry list of actions and tasks that we were recommending of things to be worked on based on our experience and our recommendations. And so there have been a lot of accomplishments as you look through in these areas. And I just want to touch on a few of them. You know, first off, it's very evident that your leadership team works well together. There's a lot of things that in that organization checkup. Matter of fact, most of everything that we had recommended 5 years ago have been worked and corrected, implemented if it wasn't in place. You know, on the customer service side, doing these annual customer surveys or biannual customer surveys and revised customer bills for more clarity to the customer, updating of the website, several customer programs and energy reduction, recycling incentives. You rewrote or wrote your electric rules and standards and rates for customers. You have the board, I believe, has new bylaws within that as well. So there was a lot done in that space. On the technology side, you know, you implemented a new CIS system. You implemented AMI, which is becoming industry standard. You were continuously looking for solutions to increase efficiencies, and you eliminated a lot of redundancies that were in the systems, and you moved to the cloud with some of your computing and some of your technology, which again are industry best practices. On the generation side, you decommissioned a coal power plant. You've lowered your supply costs by millions. You've reduced rates to your customers. You're in the process right now, obviously, of figuring out what that future looks like in the power supply space. You restructured your organization without employee layoffs. You've been retooling, which we were very impressed with. You've been retraining, retooling your existing staff, at least those that want to stay with the organization, to avoid layoffs, and that's highly commendable on your part. You've added renewables, and as I mentioned, you're in the process of creating a new plan. On the finance side, I'll never forget this, but I remember hearing that, you know, one of the big things was a clean audit report. It was something that you hadn't had, I believe, in not all the previous years, but at least in the recent memory when we were here back in 2016. You've strengthened the processes and reporting. You've had zero findings in your financial audits. You have consistent cost of service studies that are happening every 5 years, and you've stabilized your cash on hand. On the operation side, you've increased your focus on vegetation management. You've turned into much more of a proactive operation than a reactive operation within that. The safety side, you've reduced your recordable accidents. You've maintained relationships with your first responders and even had classes, joint classes with first responders in the community. You have pamphlets at community events, including safety information in your newsletters. So there's just a lot that you've had going on, and and I just touched on a few of them, but it's highly commendable to the board and staff for all of the accomplishments since we were last here 5 years ago. And we always like to start off by giving credit where credit is due. So So let's now move into now, the here and now, at least in 2020, when we provided went through the process the end of last year. And, you know, in this, again, this is a little bit different than our organization checkup. And as you look at this, you know, we go through and we look at the various areas. You saw all of those. We focused on some much more than we did others. You know, quite frankly, we didn't put a lot of focus on the power supply side. One, that's not our strength internally at Hometown. That's one area that even when we were created, that Public Power said, stay out of the power supply space because we have joint action agencies. We've got others in the space, the Energy Authority, that do these kind of things. So just in full disclosure, we spent little time on the power supply space. But these are the areas that we did deeper dives in. And here were some of the risks that came out. So this is just a high level summary. But one of the things that we, at least it was our observation, that you did a lot of tactical things over the last 5 years. You corrected or you enhanced the organization through doing some very specific tasks which were needed. And again, we just walked through a lot of those. Now, as you look forward, it's like, well, how do you as an organization, how do you capture that? How do you memorialize that? How do you put that into day-to-day process? How do you then have a policy where necessary? And how do you help build and strengthen that, not building, but strengthen and ensuring the foundation you've put in place today remains? I'm sure you all want to make sure that whether you're staff or whether you're a governing body member, that you leave this place better than when you came into it. I mean, that's what good governance is. That's what good leadership is. So as you look through all of this, you know, that's one of the things that you're going to see us talk a lot about. And if you read the document, you'll see a lot of is, okay, how do you now take what you've done and how do you put that into, make sure the process is efficient? If there's process improvements, taking those into account, but especially on the policy side, how do you capture that, memorialize it? So if none of you are here a week from now, could somebody come in, pick it up, look at something and say, okay, I get this, I can take this forward. And you can't do that 100%. I mean, there's just no way. But I mean, to the extent that you can start building around that. I will say it's a challenge for an organization of your size because it's not like you've got a big staff that doesn't have a lot to do that can just sit around and write process and policy. So don't take that with a grain of salt, that you have to be able to prioritize and focus and figure out how you do that. But it's taking that next step in the maturation process. So that's what that first part is. All of the policy, the framework, the scorecard, the metrics is that do you have the right policy in place? Are you able to measure it? Are you as a board able to see, hey, I see where we're going. I see how we're progressing to that. And I can see where we're doing right on track, where we're behind, where we may be ahead. That's what that first area is. Now, the second area, and this one's going to, shouldn't be a shock to any of you, and we'll see this again in the survey results as well, is the board itself, the governance side of things. There is a lack of cohesion with the board that is very evident when we went through not only the interview process for this business risk readiness assessment, but you're going to see this as a reoccurring theme, or a theme, I should say, in the interviews when you see the results of that interview. So from the standpoint of good governance, you know, there's room for improvement, we believe. It's not a knock to any one of you. We don't personalize this, but just collectively looking at it said, you've got upside on the board side, if you will. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this, but it's really around the cohesiveness. It's around the decision-making, and it's around the ability then that once a decision's been made to accept that and move on to something else versus continuing to bring it back up. So that we'll talk more about that as we get into it. The cyber's physical security side, quite frankly, this is not necessarily the physical side, but the cyber side is a weakness across all of public power. This is an area where we are growing. And quite frankly, the entire industry. I mean, when you look at the retail space, you know, everybody struggles with cybersecurity. And so this one is an area where, you know, we are seeing so much more IT personnel coming into public power just because we're getting so much more technology. We're doing so much more from the standpoint of the internet and the cloud base that we have to have protections around that. There's pros and cons with going to the cloud and having all this technology. The pros is you're able to work more efficiently. You're able to provide better customer value. You're able to do greater things. The con is that you are much more susceptible to bad behaving people on the internet, in the cloud, of being able to extract information and being able to impact your operations. So we got into a lot of that around the preparedness, the policy, the compliance, especially as we look at then from the standpoint of being able to protect customer data, all of those things. So we provided some recommendations within that space. I would say in this area, though, for your size, I wouldn't characterize it as a weakness as much as just there's an opportunity and a need that we have more focus in this IT, in this cyberspace. And we put some recommendations in there for that.
Tim, can I just make a comment here?
Yes.
The original document for this reason was classified confidential. Cerise is kind of a cybersecurity expert, and she pointed out some things there that, quite frankly, are not public, are not wise to publicly distribute. So after that, there was some question. We do want to release this document publicly in a transparent nature. So what we did is we redacted the portions that are that made the document confidential and redistributed it. So you have two documents in your possession. One of them is a confidential document and should be treated accordingly given those restrictions. And the second one is a public document that we will be posting online if at the appropriate time when the board has maybe a bit more time to review it. We also forwarded it to City Council, but that document has 10 or 12 lines redacted, and you know what they are. You can look back at your other document and see what they state. But primarily, it just points to a bit of a weakness in what Tim was talking about, and I think just from that perspective, those weaknesses are we don't really want to publicize where we have a weakness because in that nature, it just kind of shows those that may want to try to get into our servers and that sort of thing, the weakness that we currently possess. So that's the redacted versus the non-redacted report. And, the primarily redacted portions are in that cybersecurity area. So thanks for that, Tim. I just thought it'd be appropriate to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And from our standpoint, we fully support and recommend the redaction of anything that would give somebody that wanted to do harm to BLP, any more ammunition out there. So that's why, again, I reinforce, completely agree. So what Sharice did was, I think Renee had reached out, said, we want to make this a public document, especially in that cybersecurity space. What would you redact? And as Dave said, Sharice had a lot of experience in the cyber customer information protection side. So with that and the privacy, so she took that and so the redactions you'll see were our recommended redactions within that. Appreciate that, Dave, reminding me of that. Business continuity and disaster recovery. Right now, as you guys are in a situation, as you all know, where you've went from 2 operational sites, I think, to 1 operational site. That's fair to say, isn't it? And that's the world you're living in now with the retirement of your coal plant. And with that, you have some exposure, and you know that from the standpoint of your business continuity, your disaster recovery side. If something happened to this complex here, it would be more difficult for you, although staff has good temporary or interim plans, I should say, in place of how to handle that. But if you would have some kind of natural disaster here or something would happen, how would you continue operations, continue serving your customers in that fashion? And so that's when we get into how you recover from a disaster. And that's just one of the example. But how do you recover from a disaster situation? And then how do you continue to have business operations? So that business continuity around that's very critical. And so you'll see that we made some recommendations within the report of a second site. I will tell you that because this came up in some of the interview questions about the need for a second site. And we like for a second geographic site to be somewhere that's not in close proximity to your current geographic site, just in case tornado, something like that would come through and damage this facility where it wasn't able to be staffed. Where could you set back up, or where have you set back up that you could operate? Have you practiced that? Have you went through tabletop exercises and simulated those just to see? And again, it's less common, I will tell you, for a utility of your size, it's less common to do that, but it is a best practice. So having a secondary operational site that you can operate from and serve your customers from, and then testing that through tabletop exercises. So you're not going through a test phase when you're actually in the emergency side itself. So just wanted to share that within that. So you'll see something in there.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, Larry.
How many municipalities in the state of Michigan do you know that goes that far to separate facilities?
I don't know in the state of
You
Michigan.
don't know any.
I just don't know the status of, because we haven't worked with that many Michigan utilities. I don't know if staff or if others know of that, but I'm not sure.
I can
I mean, the
address,
city of Holland, they put everything in one building.
that's not true at all, Larry.
They have different production areas.
No, I think this is a really good example. We were one of them. We duplicated all our servers on 2 sites. So we had all of our network servers on this site. We also had them all located at the power plant. That is very common practice for, it's not saying they have 2 offices. It's, if they have a production site, it's very common for them to have alternate servers, IT equipment at multiple sites, so that if one site goes down, they can move their.
Well, you can't operate unless you do that.
Correct. That's what he's saying. We currently
I
have.
know, but we're talking cybersecurity here, security.
Right.
So we had to separate facilities. That was the question.
Right.
The
So.
question wasn't operations.
So right now we have all of our servers, all of our personnel stationed on one site. That is relatively uncommon, quite frankly, for a utility our size. And almost every, Zeeland has two sites. They're near each other, but they have their equipment separated and duplicated at both sites. So to the extent that, and what we would have to do now is if something came through here, we would have to put trailers either on this site and then
Well, you said Zeeland has 2 production sites.
no, they have an office and a production site.
Okay.
And they duplicate their IT equipment at both locations so that they can, for instance, if in the circumstance that we were previously in with Sims, if this site was wiped out, we could immediately move all of the personnel that we have here from a customer service perspective to Sims, and we could move computers, laptops, that sort of thing into the spare space that we had at Sims and continue to operate. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be a customer service center, but we could continue to cut bills. We could continue to provide services. So when he's talking about the backup plan, is it looks at how you're going to continue to operate. This, what we currently would do is we would have to bring in temporary trailers. Rather than
Bring in what?
temporary trailers to operate out of. And then we would have to move that equipment and restart all of our equipment out of either on this site or a remote site. And that is somewhat uncommon for a utility our size to have all of our eggs in a single operational basket. The only other sites that we have are substations at this
So
point.
what do municipalities that do not have generation, do they have multiple sites as well?
So I mean, I can speak to some of them that I know about, but some smaller municipalities will have a emergency control center or something like that. Where they will duplicate City Hall. In Zeeland, we had a basement facility where we could, if City Hall was wiped out, they would reset up, their operations somewhere else. And for us, that was the basement of the library. And then the utility had a presence in that area as well, so that the community could continue to operate. Now, when utilities get a bit bigger than that, they duplicate maybe City Hall in one location and the utilities in another location. So again, I think it's all this disaster preparedness issue, but to the extent that you only have one site, disaster preparedness becomes a bit more difficult. And I think that's all they're saying here is it's not undoable. It's not, but even small areas like, I look at very, very small cities typically have a disaster location that would allow City Hall to be, wiped out, and they could continue to provide, services, municipal services from an alternate location. That's the disaster preparedness that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think too, Larry, just to separate out, my apologies. I'd moved on from the cyber piece into that business continuity piece. There's multiple layers to that. One is the server backup, which, you know, you've got the cloud, you can do that. There's the operational, you know, how would you work operationally as well? And that would include then customer service. Could you improve customer service? And quite frankly, now everybody is relooking their business continuity plans, even if they have them in place, because most didn't prepare for a pandemic. So this past year has really brought a lot of light, and we're getting a lot of questions around, hey, we never planned for a pandemic, that we need to update our business continuity plan to see now from what we know, how would we react differently? What do we need to be prepared for in the event of another pandemic? So. No, but work from home policy, those things, being able to work remotely and having the technology and the infrastructure in place. But yeah, it's.
Actually, we did that as well, Larry. We did that as well. When we split, we did not shut down, and we went to a split shift. And yes.
But we didn't have to go build another facility just to manage the pandemic requirements.
But what we did do is we moved the equipment that we had over to the power plant
Well, you
site.
do what you have to do.
We moved it to the power plant site, a different site.
Yeah.
And we had some of our people operate out of that site and some of our people to operate out of this site. So they didn't cross, if the
And the
COVID,
second site was where?
we just parked the equipment over at the power plant. And Holland did the same thing. All these communities, they split their operations.
You
So
don't
we
have a
wouldn't,
power plant.
I know, we just put the equipment out there. And this is what Holland did as well, is it was very, very common for consumers did it, whatever. They did not want all of their people to work together at a single site. So what they did is they split them. So we moved some of our equipment. I think our tree trimmers, they never came in to this site, right? For a while. We had them park their equipment somewhere else so that we would not have them in the same spot at the same time until we split. And as long, when we split crews, then we did it by time. All right. So we had one crew come in for a week, another crew come in for another week. That's another way to split crews. But the idea is to not have all of the people from a pandemic perspective in the same room at the same time. Separate people we've done this here, is we don't allow them to take their breaks all together. We separate them out. And by having multiple sites, it allows you to split the crews so that they aren't all working on top of each other. And that is a real problem that we have right now, is all of our employees are working on top of each other.
And I think the key and we probably should move on just for purposes of timing, but the key is just thinking through based on our experience now, especially with the pandemic, but based on our peer group's experience and other disasters, other things, can we continue operations? And how does that look? And so, you know, just to generalize it, I mean, one thing's a natural disaster if this building gets taken out, but another thing is looking at what others have experienced, and then it just comes down to risk. Saying, well, how likely is that to happen to us, and do we want to be prepared for that or not? So whatever that is, and that's what you think about, and you're familiar in the private sector as well with business continuity. I mean, how do you continue operations, you know, if these things happen? But one of the things then too is practicing it, because too many times, especially we're guilty in public power in general, we're guilty of having a plan that we'd have to go dust off that we hadn't ever practiced. So putting it into action and practicing it so it's fresher, so when it does happen, because again, customers are going to look at you and they're going to say, well, hey, you know, they're probably not going to be as forgiving as we think they should be if we have one of these. So it's just that. And Dave, what Dave referred to there is we saw our industry with the pandemic, most everybody went to split crews. They went to split crews, split times where they were not around each other. So if it did run through one crew, you still had your other crew that hadn't been exposed, at least from that internally. So let's move. Let me pause for just a second and ask again. I'm learning as well, and I hope I'm getting better with this the virtual side. But I would like to just ask if Todd or Jack have any questions or comments up to this point, because I don't want to run roughshod over you all.
I do not.
I'm all set.
Okay, thank you. What's that? Todd has a question? I'm sorry.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay, all right, good. Well, again, I believe both of you will jump in, but I just want to give you the opportunity every once in a while as well. So let's move on then to the IT side. Similar to cyber, this is an area that we typically, in public power in general and community-owned utilities in general, we lack the necessary skill sets and numbers of staff to really support this. As again, we move more and more, it's always a balancing act, get that. But as we move more and more, we have to be thinking, we have to be strategizing, and we should be budgeting around IT support, whether that's internal, whether that's external, whatever that looks like. But we're not going to slow down, and that's one thing we'll talk about in the industry trends. We're not going to slow down in our transition with technology. We know we're moving to much more sensors and electronic environment. We're moving to new technologies daily. How do we support that? Too many times we go and implement a technology, and yet we haven't put in place the infrastructure of how we're going to support that in the process. So on the IT side, we see this lacking across most. It's no exception here at BLP. We think that there is a lack today of IT support, especially of what you're going to need going forward. So we put that into the risks and so forth. That, and I'm not saying that you all have done this intentionally, but you put in a lot of new technology over the last 5 years. Now the big question you have to ask yourself is, can you support that? Along with any additional technology that you bring in, can you support that? And so that's where, whether it's internal, external, however you support it, we saw that as a risk in regards to the staffing side, because your IT side right now is shared internally. Not that you don't have good people, not that you don't have knowledgeable people. We would challenge you that you don't have enough to focus on this, especially going forward. So
Tim,
just wanted to put that. Yes, John.
What did you find in terms of the written procedures that would be so necessary if we lost our IT person? In other words, a new person coming on board knowing what to do.
Right. I think I would just say summarize that by lacking that but I think that's general across the organization. IT is no different, that you lack some policy and process in place. Doesn't mean that you don't have it, but there's room for improvement in that. John, and you bring up a good question as you think about the skill sets that could come in. You could probably go out and get that skill set pretty quickly, but how's that skill set fit in with your current operations and processes? So onboarding them and getting them up to speed would take longer, just because you don't have that process policy in place in all areas, not in all areas, just in some areas with that. Good question. Okay, on the compliance side, and this is an area where we had some real good, healthy conversation with staff on compliance. And again, keep in mind, we're looking at it from the standpoint of best practices, especially moving forward, that, how are you covered in the compliance? Today, you share responsibilities on compliance. You do a relatively good job in compliance. But again, it gets into the process side, the policy side, and especially in certain areas that I won't go into here, but you have in your report, we thought that you had some weaknesses that you could improve upon within that compliance. It's not that you're not in compliance necessarily, not stating that, as much as how are you oversight? Because as we know too, and as you know as a board, we have more and more compliance coming down on us, if not daily, definitely annually, where we're asked to report, we're asked to do this, we're asked to do that. So that's not going away. So within that, just some focus in that compliance area, getting some process in place, some backup in place to the extent you can. One of the challenges you're going to have is a utility of your size, you don't have a lot of staff. So it's not that you can't, you're going to struggle in being able to have a backup for a backup in everything that you do. It's just not, in utilities of your size, it's just not practical. So it's that balancing act of how you do that, how you ensure that you're in good compliance, not only in good compliance, but you're prepared from a reporting standpoint, staying up to speed with that. The work order management and asset management side, this we think is a technology issue. There's some process challenges for you in there as well. You have made some good strides in this space since we were here 5 years ago, but we think now that you can take that next step, especially with technology in this area. There's some efficiencies within that you can have as well, but we think that some good technology within that, and this is something I know staff's working on. They shared that with us, not there yet, but you're working on more of this in the work order asset management. you know, from the standpoint of getting all of your equipment out there, you know where it's at, you know the age of it. You're being able to tying that back to your inventory and financial systems. You're able to do some of that, but not all of that today outside of a manual process. And so what we're saying is that next step in technology you ought to be thinking about, and I know you are, staff is moving to automate that to the extent that you can, just so you've got a better feel for the age, your depreciation is tied back in automatically versus a lot of transposing manually into your various systems. So that was the gist of that. The last one's very similar on the IVR side. And we had some good debate with staff on this one. While it is definitely laudable on your part to want to answer every phone call live, and there's a part of your customer base that prefer that, there's also a part of your customer base that would prefer to be as efficient as possible and would like to do something without having to talk to anybody. And that's the younger generation. That's what's coming up. As we know, everybody does things on this and they want to do everything on this and they don't want to talk to anybody. Now that's a portion of your population. It's not all of you. But what we think though is there's some efficiencies to be gained with some additional technology, and we call it an IVR, integrated voice response system, that you could leverage technology to improve your customer service from a timing standpoint. Doesn't mean that you have to do either or. Doesn't mean that you have to go fully to an IVR where customers can never talk live to somebody. That's not what it means. But there are definitely call handling systems that are what we call hybrids that'll sit in there, and the automation will ask you what you need, then it'll route you to the right person. Versus today calling in and getting a general person asking you what you need and then transferring you to the right department to get that done. So this is a technology issue, and I know there's probably pushback. I can see some of the faces here right now going, I want to talk to a live voice, and get that. And you don't want to necessarily pull that away, but you want to complement and augment that with technology to be able to work as efficiently as you can. And this is the part of the challenge that we have today, is that we're serving so many different age groups. We're serving so many different customer groups in regards to what their customer service preferences are. How do we meet the majority? We're never going to be able to be the best in every customer's eyes in customer service. But how do we ensure we're serving the majority effectively and so forth? And I know you've got some customer service data or some survey data as well. I don't know if it pointed to that as well, that you're just in the process of, I think, getting out here soon. But anyway, that was the IVR piece of that. So I'll go through the next steps and I'll pause and see if there's any questions before we move on to the industry update side. But so what our next steps are then is we gave our recommendations to staff. Now we didn't necessarily prioritize that into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down the line. We gave recommendations in each one of those risk areas that we saw. But still, we're not an expert on your business. We spent a few days through an interview process looking at some of your information you provided. You all are the experts, so it's up to you to prioritize that. Now, what I would say though is you've got a great opportunity, and staff mainly, but board as well, a great opportunity to prioritize that through your strategic planning process. As you look now in these next 5 years, based on the information that you've received back, and it's not all inclusive. So I don't want to tee this up that all of this needs to be in your strategic planning and only this needs to be in your strategic planning. That's not the point. It's just that be factoring some of that in as we go through. That factors into that SWOT analysis, that we talked about. We even went through in the interviews on the SWOT. And then you'll end up with this updated strategic plan later this year as we go through this process and updating that. So you really have updated now your 5-year roadmap of what you're looking at accomplishing over the next 5 years. So that's the next steps and how you leverage this document from that side. So I will pause. First off, from the board, any questions, anything else? I hit that pretty fast at a high level, but at least wanted to update you on the results of that. Larry?
You created this document, is that correct?
Yes, Sheree Swanson, my colleague, did. Yes, we did though.
And all this redacting?
Yes.
You did that?
We did that.
And how did you determine what to redact?
Well, Sheree Swanson redacted all of what we thought would be potentially a competitive threat, especially in the cyberspace, of any weaknesses within that we didn't want to put the utility at risk by exposing any weaknesses in there that a bad actor could come in and say, hey, I can hack into the system because of this. So that's why we redacted.
Well, under risk number 4 about business continuity and disaster recovery, give me an example, not specific, if you will, but give me an example what you would redact, take out in general.
Tim, Larry, you have
Just
both,
wait a minute, Dave.
you have both copies. You have the information that was redacted. You have both copies. So you know exactly what was taken out.
I have both copies?
Yes,
Where's the other copy?
you received them both at home. One first, one second. We provided the one that's marked confidential is unredacted. There is nothing removed. And then the second
I only
copy,
got one.
no, we provided them both.
Well, we can make sure you get it.
We can make sure you have both, but we could tell you exactly what was redacted
Okay.
and you should,
I didn't, I don't know.
okay. Does everyone else remember getting two documents?
Okay.
Well, let's just make sure Larry gets it.
Okay, we'll make sure you get it, so you know exactly what is,
Okay.
what is
Well, I
taken
just
out.
wanted to know
Oh,
an
yeah.
example.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
But I can look it up myself as long as I do.
Well, I just don't want to share it here in the public as well, because that would kind of give
Yeah,
away the
yeah.
redaction.
Well, I just wondered.
No. So yeah, so let's make sure Larry gets, the, and can we provide that for him today before he leaves? Can we get him a copy of that? Well, just
Okay.
the break or something. Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good question, Larry. Thank you. And then also from Todd or from Jack, any other questions on that report?
No,
Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, that brings up a good point. Should we take a quick break here before we get into the industry trends here? Just because Renee, I think, liked the excuse of being able to take the break. Well, let's do that. Can we take a 10-minute break then and be back at 11:15 or 11:10? I know Larry's got to leave at noon, so I want to be respectful of his time, and John's got to leave at 1. Okay. So let's be back in 10 minutes then. We'll take a quick break.
How long is this going to go on?
Jack, Todd, are you all back?
Yeah.
I'm all set.
All right, there's Jack. Todd, are you back? Okay. Okay. Todd is back. Todd, can you hear us? Todd's muted. Not in stature, just in technology right now. Okay, so you can hear us, Todd?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, that's a lot better.
All right.
I have to make sure Jerry's not sleeping.
Okay. Nobody's sleeping here, Jack. I can vouch for that. Or if they are, they're sleeping with their eyes open, I should say. Okay. And Jack and Todd, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. All right, great. Okay. All right. So again, just to summarize, before we leave that, again, kudos to the organization in doing a lot of good things over the last 5 years. And what we've provided now is to take the next step in your maturation process. Hopefully that's a good guiding tool that we can develop in part of that, or you can develop part of that into then your strategic plan and be working that now the next 5 years. So with that said, let's move in then to the national industry trends. I don't want to spend a lot of time in here, so I'm going to step through some areas that we're seeing that won't be of any surprise to you, I don't think. And then ask Dave that if there's anything different from or anything to add from a regional and local level to do that. Because again, we're not experts on Michigan. We're not experts on Grand Haven. So if there's anything, from the standpoint, Dave, of Michigan or the utility itself or your area here, please chime in there. But really, it probably no surprise, some of these are the same areas that you saw 5 years ago. Some of them are refreshed, some of them are new. But, I'm going to walk through each one of these areas, just hit them at a very high level. Things to consider and think about as you're thinking about the next 5 years. And sometimes, we look at things in California, we look at things elsewhere, and we think, well, that's just crazy. That'll never happen in Michigan. May not. But we do think that trends do, and we see trends historically. When you look, trends do migrate across this country. So, and I'm not saying I just use California as an example, but not trying to say be like. But you're going to see some of the things as I go through that are going to maybe say, yeah, that's us, and others that you say maybe that's not us. One thing that is that's all of us, and that is when you look nationally at the regulatory environment, things are always in flux anymore. I mean, we're seeing it right now. We're living it right now. We're over the last 4 years, agree with it or not, we've had a significant change in our industry that's been impacted by federal regulations and federal mandates. There were big changes when we went from the last administration to the current administration. Now, as of today, we're entering into a new administration. And one of the challenges we have is that fluctuating where, you know, the federal government not having a long-term strategic plan and able to execute that, we see it shifting every 4 years. That just adds uncertainty. So we have to be able to comply with that and deal with that and prepare for that the best we can. The infrastructure side, there's being more and more on grid resiliency, grid hardening. That's always something we hear a lot about. Again, you know, we're seeing more natural disasters across this country, and we're seeing more impacts on that. I would say, though, that for the most part, we've done a really good job in the electric utility space. Cyber, as we already touched on, cyber and physical security are just new normals that we have to deal with, and we better prepare and plan for. Too many times on the cyber side, I hear say, well, they'll never target us. We're too small. We're rural. That's exactly where the targets are today. The targets are today because we're most susceptible in the smaller rural areas because we don't have as much safeguards in place as bigger utilities do from that side of things. The tax exempt financing. I'll be surprised if, again, we're not under attack right away on tax exempt financing because the federal government, especially upon changes of administration, are always looking at ways to balance the budget. They see tax exempt financing as low hanging fruit. And this administration coming in is dealing even with deeper debt because of the pandemic and a lot of the stimulus dollars that have been handed out over this last year. And so don't be surprised if we're not back under the microscope and attack with tax exempt financing. And then, of course, the recent pandemic. We have experienced a lot of things, but we've never experienced anything like this as far as the way that we've reacted, handled, so forth. As Dave mentioned, the way that we've changed operations to be able to protect our staff and be able to provide reliability and high quality service. So not only for the customer side, but for the employee side. So that's something new that, you know, we're going to be dealing with moving forward. On the state side, we have the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard. I believe Michigan's at 15% by 2021. I don't know what happens after this year, or if that's still in debate or if it remains that. But that's something that we have. We also have from the standpoint of, we just see more local activism. We're seeing more activism at the federal side, obviously played out the last couple of weeks. We're also seeing it, we've seen it play out over 2020. We're seeing a lot of local activism that we just need to make sure that we're on top of, preparing for, dealing with to the extent that we can. And what we're seeing too is even in those states where there's not a heavy state mandate for greening or decarbonizing, we're seeing that pushed at the local level a lot more. We're seeing big cities, even in very red states that are very coal and natural gas and carbon dependent, that are stepping up and saying, hey, we want to be greener. So even though our state hasn't taken that initiative, we have. I'm not getting a debate right, wrong, don't want to do that. Everybody's got their opinions on that, just saying that it's something that's not going to go away. And what I have heard, though, I will tell you, is over the last 2 to 3 years, we've went away from, I've seen the industry and people going away from renewables to decarbonization. Because I think the part of that is that with nuclear potentially coming back into play, with hydro having potential more play, versus just so much focus on green, on wind, on solar. So we're looking at decarbonization. I'm hearing that term a lot more than just renewables or greening, if you will. So again, very highly debatable topic. Don't want to go down that rabbit hole here, but just wanted to point that out, that that's a new term we're seeing a lot more, is really more focus on decarbonization versus just greening, utilizing renewable resources. So Dave, anything on that you would add from a local or state standpoint on just regulation?
Yeah, I can just point to a couple of differences between Michigan. Distributed energy resources, I think that's really something that we need to be focused on when you run a generation plant or when you shut down a generation plant, as we have. I think a lot of emphasis is going to be on distributed energy resources and how you facilitate those. I think there's a real lack of understanding on that. That just doesn't happen. A distribution system has to have a lot of things done to it before you can have high levels of distributed energy resource. I would add demand response in that as well. So demand response is a term that we need to understand and incorporate into our integrated resource planning efforts. It's interesting. If you haven't read it yet, you probably should. As you can go online and read Detroit Edison's and Consumers Energy's integrated resource plan for the state. One of the things that Michigan is different from the rest of the states on is with storage. You hear a lot about battery storage, but the conditions in Michigan are completely different from battery storage than other states, given our long-term use of the Ludington Pump Storage Facility. So we have, as a proportion of our system needs already, substantial amounts of storage online and usable. So when renewable energy started coming online in Michigan, what you look at is that proportion of storage to intermittent resources. And Michigan is well ahead of the curve because of Ludington Pump Storage. So that doesn't mean that there's not a need for storage going forward. It's just that we don't have the immediate need that a lot of other states have because we have that Ludington Pump Storage Facility.
Who's doing the storage? Is that DTE and Consumers Energy by any chance?
Ludington Pump Storage. You know what we're talking about there, right?
You're talking about water?
Yeah.
Pump storage? Oh,
Hydro pump storage.
I thought you were talking battery storage.
No, battery storage at this point in time is, and that's what he talked about when we talk about storage.
Yeah.
Primarily when we talk about storage nationwide, that's battery storage. And you know, with Tesla and automatic or battery operated cars, there's been a lot of talk about battery implementation, which is not really hit that sweet spot for cost yet. But as you get higher and higher levels of renewable penetration, you need storage to make it work. And primarily that's battery storage. So in areas where you have high penetration rates of renewable energy, California, Texas, they're implementing a lot of storage. In Michigan, we're actually ahead of that curve because we have Ludington Pump Storage. So there's already an avenue where when the wind's not blowing, and if you look at where some of the largest wind facilities are right adjacent to the Ludington Pump Storage Facility. So there was some thought from a state perspective about that. So just when we talk about storage, Michigan has a little bit different look at storage. And actually we've bought ourselves some time. There really isn't a need in Michigan for storage at this point in time, given the volume of renewables that we have and the use of Ludington Pump Storage, to the extent that there are in other states that don't have that type of facility. That's the only thing. And so I'm just trying to point out some changes between Michigan and the national or state level. The state things there, I would also put into there a regional perspective. In regional, we operate these independent systems on a regional basis. And MISO, you could put MISO in between that condition because there's various different ISOs that have implemented different measures that we need to comply with. So we need to comply with our ISO, our market requirements that are completely different in the MISO region than they are in the Casio region for California or the ERCOT region for Texas. So there's a whole nother level in there that we have to comply with that's at that regional level. So again, MISO operates completely different than PJM, which is the more east of us. So they have a separate ISO, separate generation mix, separate rules and regulations under how the marketplace has. So when you start talking about these national trends and then the state trends, we also have these regional system trends that in regulation that you need to deal with.
Tim, as a point of interest,
could I?
about the Ludington storage, how long does that run to drive that water down into the lake? Is that at a 12-hour cycle or a 10 and a rest 4? Or I mean, what?
It's typically a daily cycling, but what they'll do is if there's more wind and energy, they will pump more water. And to the extent that the wind is running at night, they'll continue to pump and then let it come. And they'll use it based on a dispatch model. They'll look at the price, and when the price is is, and the shortages are occurring, they'll let the water come
What
out.
is their maximum capability? I guess that's my question.
I think it's somewhere around 1,500 megawatts, something like that.
Okay.
It's big.
Thank
So
you.
that's why when you're talking about 250 kW of storage, it's kind of insignificant in Michigan when you have this big, huge pump storage facility sitting there that's already providing the same function as what these large battery farms are doing in Texas and California.
Tim, could you tell us how tax exempt financing would or could affect us?
Yeah, if, and Dave can answer this as well, more specific to you, but from a general standpoint, you know, what we've seen, and we saw it in the Obama administration, we saw it in the Trump administration as part of their budgeting process to limit the amount of that tax financing, tax exempt financing, maybe either eliminating it entirely for government or coming up with change where you can't get full, you're still gonna have to pay some level of tax. It wouldn't be at the commercial side, but it would be some level. So it would have huge financial impacts. If you're in the bond market, you're borrowing money out there, tax exempt. That's where the exposure is for us. And it's just not electric utilities, it's government overall. For any government, you know, tax exempt financing that's in the billions. Dave, I don't know if anything specific.
Yeah, I mean, and we haven't determined the exact volume yet but we haven't entered the bond market for quite some time, all right? Other than refinancing. So, but that tax exempt nature of our borrowings makes them more attractive to the investment community because the earnings are tax exempt. So by taking that away, essentially, and it's a federal tax exemption. So in other words, you don't pay federal income tax, and that's a hit on the US Treasury. So tax exempt bonds, when they start looking at deductions that people have, tax, you know, is one of the top 5, I believe, of quote deductions that people have in their, you know, when they file their taxes. So the federal government has continuously over the last 10, 15 years threatened the removal of tax exempt or exemptions for municipal borrowings and state borrowings, or at least limiting their use in some fashion. So as we go to the bond market this summer, not having tax exempt will cost us several probably, you know, basis points on our investment if we can't issue those tax exempt. Now, I think I don't anticipate changes in tax law in the next 6 months, but long-term, this is a significant concern for, you know, municipal utilities generally and general municipal operations. So that's the rules that they're talking about regularly. And it's just and I think municipals and states have raised concerns on this, and APPA has on our behalf.
Well, there's a lot of different areas of tax exemption status for people if you're in the bond buying market. I mean, some of your federal bonds, that doesn't qualify for state, but it's, you know, your federal income tax. But I didn't know that under the Trump administration that there was any limitations that they were proposing on municipal. The infrastructure itself is huge.
Well, and
Dollars, I'm talking, you know.
Right. It never hit the public, but behind the scenes, there was a lot of talk. And that's where, to Dave's point, the American Public Power Association and their lobbying.
Well, yeah, a lot of talk on the Democrats, yeah. But,
Right.
You know, Obama wanted to even be selective on who got the money, you know, but the Republicans have never promoted that.
Okay, I'm going to move on then and hit these other areas as quickly as possible, but I don't want to curb the conversation because this is very important as we think strategically again, that, you know, if there's any questions on this. The power supplies focus, I already mentioned this on the decarbonizing side. You know, we're seeing natural gas, wind, solar replacing coal, no surprises there. I think the big surprise is that I think the public less understands, and probably that's rightfully so because they're not experts in it like we are in the utility and the generation space, is that the majority of coal replacement has been from natural gas. It hasn't been from wind and solar, especially when you talk the energy side. capacity side, yes, there's a lot of capacity that's been added across this country, wind and solar. But when you talk about actual energy, it's really very, very small in comparison to natural gas, less carbon emissions from the standpoint of that versus coal production. We are still, though, seeing a tremendous amount of increasing in renewables. We're seeing those cost points continue to decline. Dave mentioned the DER, the distributed energy resources side already. There's a lot of that that's happening. Really, what we went from a centralized transmission and generation model to now we're going back to a decentralized. You know, we started originally back when the forefathers of our utilities built their own generation to serve because nobody bring electricity to the community. We were very decentralized to begin with. We found out through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we could get economies of scale through large scale centralized next to the supply source for whatever that, however that coal, gas, whatever it was at the time. And now, though, we're moving back to a decentralized model because you can't get things permitted. You cannot get a large scale generation project permitted. You definitely struggle to get new transmission. All of that is forcing this decentralized model of that. And the big one to keep in mind is the consumer. We are seeing now a push, especially on the corporate side, for many corporations of wanting renewables. They're doing it, one, from a cost perspective, but as important, if not more important, they're doing it from a branding standpoint, that they want to be able to brand to their consumers that buy their products that we are a decarbonized renewable. And that's why you see some of the major corporations that are forcing that. So even if you're not looking at renewables as an individual utility, you need to consider that because some of your, if you have a corporate entities in this state, or excuse me, in your community that you serve, they may be forced from the corporate level side to buy more renewables and to be able to generate more renewables. So it's just something to be aware of there on that front. Aging infrastructure. Dave, I'm sorry, anything else to add on the power supply front? Okay.
Just in Michigan, though, I think the distributed energy resource versus central plant doesn't only impact natural gas and coal. We're seeing substantial pushback on the wind side. In fact, there hasn't been a wind project proposed in a utility scale wind project approved in Michigan probably in the last 6 months to a year. And anytime one is proposed, central type large wind energy resource has been, opposed locally. And we're starting to see the same thing on solar side. So solar, large scale solar, you're starting to see pushback from adjacent landowners, that sort of thing, for large scale solar as well. So I think there is a push towards demand, what we call this distributed energy resource, smaller projects closer to the load. But those don't just happen either. To try to get, thousands of megawatts of small scale solar without utility scale plants is going to be very, very difficult for any state. But Michigan is already experiencing pushback. So this shutting down large central plants and preventing large central plant renewables or utility scale renewables is a big problem. And, I'm not so sure how, if we start pulling things off the table, i.e. large scale wind and solar, how we're going to meet these, increased penetration levels that we're talking about doing. So that's that push pull, increased renewables and desires for smaller, distributed resources. So you have both of those tensions working in Michigan and nationally. So it's important to.
I'd like to support what you're saying because in the state of Minnesota, there's 2 wind farms, 118 units and 122, I believe. And they were coming to, you can see the end of life, some of the problems that were revolving the cost of maintenance. And so they happen to be in agricultural areas. And the farm community wanted to know what it was going to cost to take these wind farms down by a unit. And not to belabor the point, but it was over $500,000. And the question is, well, why is it going to cost so much? Well, nobody can take the large spans, so they have to be broken up. they're very toxic. And so the cost of reclaiming that and recycling it into, the dump areas, if you will, is waste management is a real issue. One other point, it's sort of humorous, I think, because it's paradoxical to the point that you made about the corporate structure trying to be green. And I think there are certain disciplines or areas like technology that I think that flies well. But in Germany, you get into manufacturing and you get into the Netherlands where you've got vast acreages of glass greenhouses. They are all buying natural gas turbines to produce their own electricity and energy. In the case of greenhouses, they're not only using the energy for lighting, but they're using the carbon dioxide as a growth element in agriculture. Manufacturing speaks for itself. But anyway, just to make a point.
No, and good point. I think too that one of the fallacies that it just amazes me is that we never look at, or very seldom do we look at the true environmental life cycle of any new technology. It's just that there's a trend, solar, wind, whatever. And so we need to really do, I think, a more holistic job of anything. And I'm not anti-solar wind by any means or anything else, but anyway, well, let's move on. The aging infrastructure, you can see here, this is nothing new. This is though what you have direct control over. And this is just in making sure, and you all have done some great job. I know all of you really were very complimentary in your survey results of the upgrades you've made in your distribution system, your interconnection points, so forth. So it sounds like you guys are on top of this, but this is something that we can't let and forget about, because this is the old killing the golden goose, if you will, in regards to, we've got a very reliable system in place and how we handle that and how we can continue to generate value for our customers. So, and that's just what we're saying here, from the standpoint of as you're looking forward, what's the health of the utility? One of the things that to keep in mind is your depreciation curves. We still see some utilities that are trying to depreciate things, especially in the technology space, 30 to 40 years, like we have with a pole in the ground. That's not realistic. There's no technology probably it's going to last any more 30 to 40 years before it's going to need to be replaced. So we have to make sure that our technology curve, a depreciation curve, is up to speed there. New technologies, there's a lot of new technologies, and we know this. There's a lot coming into place today around this. We have never seen such an influx of technology, not only within our within the electric utility space, but obviously just from the standpoint of in any space today. But we're kind of late to the party a little bit in some of the technology areas for the electric utility space. And so we just need to be aware of those, and we need to be aware of the customer needs side, that we're not just saying, because we're not in an environment anymore of one size fits all. And if you want electricity, you must get it from us and you must pay it and we'll serve it to you in this way. That's history. We have to be more flexible in regards to how we deal with our different needs if we want those customers to stay with us. We've already talked about the business model changing, not only the centralized to a decentralized, but, when you look, our nation, our high demand growth is in the past. We've went through our industrial revolution. We've went through our big growth period. We've actually eliminated a lot of manufacturing. Now it's debatable if some of that's going to come back or not, but the key is that our rate structures and how they're aligned. Because if our rate structures are aligned or depending upon heavy growth, we really need to relook those rate structures. And we got a lot of examples of where utilities haven't and have been hurt from that. It's just, we got to make sure that our rate structures are aligned with what we're expecting growth wise and what our costs are on that. Dave already referred to, again, the distributed energy resources around that. We think there's a big push in certain parts of the country for the electric vehicle side. And quite frankly, some utilities are embracing that and looking at that as an economic development opportunity, because that's one of the few areas where you can increase demand is through electric vehicles for an electric utility. Typically, an electric vehicle actually is like adding another house, another residence to your grid. Now, there's downsides with that in regards to your infrastructure being able to handle that. Time will tell. And what I think is really going to force that is it's still going to come back on the air emission side. If we continue to tighten air emissions, we in the electric utility industry are no longer the greatest polluters air emission wise of carbon. We used to be, But, with elimination and the restructuring of our fleet on the generation side, when you look at it now, it's transportation and has been for a few years. So if we as a society are going to address carbon emissions into the atmosphere, we need to be looking at the transportation side. But, prying a vehicle away from you and me is a lot harder than moving from coal to natural gas on a centralized generation plant. So time will tell on that, how we do there. Customer expectations are changing and evolving. We are no longer looked at typically as a utility. We are looked at and compared to, from a customer service standpoint, as any other retail provider to that consumer. And so what I mean by that is we are being compared, right or wrong, we're being compared to the Googles, the Amazons. I order something, I get it in 3 or 4 hours. We're getting compared to all of that versus getting compared to the utility next door, Consumers Energy or something like that. So we have to think about that, and we have to think about from the standpoint of how we're serving and what our customer satisfaction is. The sixth area is workforce changes. I like to say that our customers and our workforce are one and the same. If we're meeting the needs of our customers, we have a better shot of meeting the needs of our employees and vice versa. And the big key within that is flexibility. As an employer, we can't be a one-size-fits-all employer any longer either if we want to attract and retain top talent in our industry. So it's something that we have to think about, and that's hard. I think the interesting thing is the pandemic has brought to light to many utilities that a butt in the seat in an office doesn't equal productivity, that there are different ways of getting productivity. And I'm not saying that we should go to a complete remote site workforce. I'm not saying that. But we do, though, need to be flexible with our employment on who can do their job effectively, not only for the job, but the personality and skill set wise going through that. If not, we can continue down the path saying one size fits all. You must work 8 to 5 in the office. But we just have to be realistic about the talent that we're going to be able to attract and retain when we're just not competing with other electric utilities. We're competing with the retail and other employers in our areas. So today's challenges, as we know, increasing retirements. We're seeing that. We're seeing it as well that, from the standpoint of our pay scales, are they competitive? What we like to say, I like to use the analogy of baseball. If you're a baseball fan, we've said and this hasn't changed, but in general, and I'm not saying Grand Haven, our BLP, but in general, when you look at the baseball hierarchy, you got the investor owns that are the majors, you got the co-ops that are the AAA team, and then you've got us at the AA level. And that's where our pay scale aligns when you compare that to Major League Baseball, just as an analogy, is that we're typically in third place of what we pay. Part of that is outside our control, but part of it's inside our control. And so we just have to make sure that, and pay is not everything. We know that. Pay is not everything in employee satisfaction, but we have to make sure we're somewhat competitive to be able to retain quality staff. And it's something that we have to deal with. And then, also too, again, we've already hit on this, but the pandemic, these are just some of the research results that came out of a survey in Q3, the third quarter of 2020, that APPA did and was seeing these results. And that is that residential demand is up, no surprise, everybody being locked in. This is nationally, this isn't regionally. Commercial industrial is down, and that's come back up some here in Q4 and expected to continue to incline. Delinquent payments, the 60-day arrearages of late pay has doubled and the 90 days have tripled. Of course, that's with the Relief Act of not being able to be cut off. So that's probably not a surprising statistic there. Our big concerns in the winter months, especially for up here, the northern tier states now, is we're moving back into a non-shut-off time frame, typically, and for most. And so we're going to be going through where we're going to be looking at a minimum probably of 16 months where we haven't, in some states, you haven't been able to cut off a customer, and yet they don't have to pay you. So, that's something that we have to be thinking about from a financial standpoint. And again, I'm not talking about here. I don't know what you're doing or how this is impacting you, just talking nationally. And then on a staffing side, we're seeing freezes on the hiring side, but we've seen still very few furloughing layoffs. And I think that's a tribute to how efficient we've become employment-wise across the industry. Yes.
Go back to that.
Yes.
If we can go back to slide just quickly, our residential loads are actually up higher than 6%, and our commercial industrial loads are down less. So we're down about 7 per first 6 months of the year. If you read the general manager's report for tomorrow's meeting, we've been tracking this. So, but for the first 6 months of this fiscal year, as compared to the first 6 months of the last fiscal year, our residential are up almost 15%. And some of that is due to weather related, a hotter summer. Some of it is due to the COVID, people staying at home more. But the commercial industrial is down about 6-7% right now. So a little bit different than that. On the delinquent payment side, we did have disconnects through the summer. And now we're in a non-disconnect period again. But through the summer, we did catch up. So our arrearages were not as low or about where they were last year at this time, because we did shut off during. But what happens on an annual basis here in our community, because we don't shut off for 6 months in the winter, is our arrearages do go up in the wintertime. So we're very consistent COVID to non-COVID because of that. But our arrearages in the winter are higher than the system average because we don't shut off in the wintertime. And then staffing, I think what we have been able to do here is we're reducing our workforce from 70 down to about 50 or 45 in a few years. So we are retiring people and not replacing them. So at some point in time, we need to retain people and get into this problem. But this problem is actually, retirees, when we're trying to reduce our workforce, retirees are good. We're not replacing them. And we've agreed that that's how we're gonna, but the problem is moving the employees that were left behind from one job classification to another job classification, and then training them for that role. So that staffing has been a huge part of the last 5 years, and it will be, a big part of the next 5 years as well.
Thanks, Dave. All this adds up to sorry about that. So all of this adds up then to the increasing financial pressures that we have, with all of that said, within that. And so again, just that last bullet's the key, is making sure that our rate structures are in line with what our cost structure is. And that's really from that standpoint. And then we talk about policies in the various areas, which was brought up again in the report. And then you may have seen this. I just find this interesting. When you look at the value from a consumer standpoint of electricity overall, and you see what the increase has been, in the recent past, from 1991 to 2018, a little bit outdated, but still relative the same, is that when you look at what people buy, what consumers have to have, especially critical products and services for life in general, you look at all of this, electricity is still one of the greatest values there is, even below what the consumer pricing index has been. The increase over that period of time then has just been 61% when you look at some of these others. I always just find that very interesting graph when you look at increasing costs for a household, that we're still very affordable in regards to, and we haven't had the price escalation that other critical needs within a household have had. So
I can't tell that on my bill at my house.
You can't?
No.
Those others?
I mean, just a quick number. Natural gas is $50 and electricity is $200. And we were in the greenhouse business at one time, and I can guarantee you gas was expensive, coal was expensive, gas was expensive compared to electricity. And that whole thing is bottom up and top bottom.
Well, and this was just a national stat. I don't know what Michigan.
Yeah,
but this was nationally when you look at what I would agree with the healthcare one. I think mine's been a lot more than that.
That might be even a little light.
That's right. That's right. Okay, well, I want to be real respectful. Larry, I know you have to leave in 15 minutes. Is that right? At noon? Okay. We're behind here, and it's been due to good conversation, but maybe instead of going through the strategic plan, and Dave, I ask you this as well, I'm wondering if we should jump ahead. We can come back to this. But I wonder if we should jump ahead and go through the survey results so Larry has a chance to see those. Would that be appropriate that we go through that, or how do we want it? What would be the best use for the next 15 minutes for the strategic plan that I went through? That would be good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what I want to do is I'm going to jump ahead, and so let's move down, and we'll come back and look at these others. But I want to jump ahead. And just go through these board survey results. So Rob, were you able to keep up with me there? Okay. And then we'll come back for the rest and we'll spend a little bit of time. I don't want to gloss over these other things, but I think it's important. As you all know, we went through anywhere between, it varied between 30 minutes and an hour conversation that I had with each one of you individually, all 5 board members and all 5 of the leadership team. As I mentioned to you, this is anonymous, so I'm not tying anybody's name to any comment. And also I'm summarizing in regards to what I felt like those results were from that feedback. So you may see some things that aren't toned up enough for your mind. You may think that they need to be, that some are toned down, whatever it is, but I hopefully I've captured the gist. And I think this is important. And we'll talk more about this as we go throughout the strategic planning process. But one of the things, the first question I had, the other thing I was going to tell you is I've kept the board and the staff results separate. Okay, so the board, I summarized the board and I summarized staff, but as I mentioned earlier, I think it's important to see the alignment or misalignment between the two. And I know this is fine print, so I hope you can see this, but on the board response, and the first question I had is, looking 5 years out, stick that stake in the ground 5 years out, where would you like to see BLP? Because that's the time frame of this next strategic plan is 5 years. Where would you like to see it? How would you like for it to be different, if at all? And so on the board response, Harbor Island project completed. I think this is very similar to in regards to what staff had said as well within this. They had generalized it a little bit more. But you can see there that not just from the generation, but an ops center, rehabilitation from an environmental standpoint, and then also a couple of you had referenced the floodplain taken into consideration there. And I came up with these categories. I didn't force fit you into these categories. I just summarized and what I heard and said, okay, I heard 4 things really. Harbor Island project completed, redevelopment, power supply, customers and community, and the board improvement. Those are the 4 areas that I heard from the board. So maybe I won't read down through all of these, but on the power supply, you know, there's definitely a divide between the board in regards to what power supply should look like going forward within this. And I know you're in the midst of that. There was a lot of talk around the snow melt, you know, from the standpoint of that agreement being renegotiated within that with the city side. There was considerations in regards to an EMP attack that came up on the grid, you know, as far as local generation versus centralized. So there was a lot within that. On the customer community side, maintaining, nobody disagreed with this. Everybody wanted the high level customer service and competitive rates. Some said rates lower than others in the area. And of course, competitive has got different meanings to different people. Community mistrust came up within that. And it sounds like my take is that community mistrust has been developed through your generation and power supply time here. Has been a critical driver of that. It sounded like, and what I gleaned from the conversations. More board GM transparency with additional public input came out. Again, I think this is mainly stems around the generation piece of what you're going through, the power supply. Improved relations between board and city council and between the GM and the city manager on that from the standpoint of just relations with the city side came up. Then board improvement. And quite frankly, I was very impressed that the board acknowledged of themselves that you all need improvement, that you've got, you know, you need better alignment and leadership. You need board approved outcomes to be accepted and ability to move on once the majority has ruled, I guess, and voted and on a project or whatever the topic is and moving on. Encouraging citizen participation was one, with evening board meetings versus afternoon to encourage that participation. And then all members received the same information at the same time came up. Staff was a little different on their front, but you can see the current capital projects. So this mainly was generation related, Harbor Island, the diesel plant itself. The board improvement came up as well. You can see there within that more cohesiveness, effectiveness, more formal policies in place for the board. Continued improvement in the various areas of operations. You can see those, and a lot of those were pointed out again in the business readiness risk assessment. And then the transition and trained workforce, again, completion of the transition of your power plant workforce. So that was that 5-year picture, you know, painting where you would like to see within that. Now, what could prevent you from achieving its vision? I asked that, saying, okay, with that said, with that picture you just painted for me, what could prevent the BLP from achieving that? Community opposition and lack of input from the board standpoint. environmental regulations, and then governance. That's still another big piece here. Lack of alignment, not only within the BLP board, but lack of alignment with board and city council on the governance side. City council interfering in BLP operations. You have an independent board here. I understand that. And so the relationship with the city trying to make decisions on behalf of BLP, this is not uncommon. Cities, a lot of times you have independency here, but it can tell you when utilities are part of an enterprise fund to a general fund as far as a city department, there's much more of a risk of the city raiding the funds of the utility and driving down the asset value and performance based upon utilizing those monies for other things. And that's why we call it payment in lieu of taxes that is provided, or pilot, or general fund transfer, whatever it's called. The other one was unresponsive to the public input, unwillingness to hit the pause button on Harbor Island and generation plan. Heard a lot about the Harbor Island piece. I know that's going to continue to be a topic for you all in your decision-making process, and especially public input within that, which my understanding is there's been some. Others would like to see more within that. We'll have further discussion, I'm sure, around that. And then leadership, change in staffing, lack of collaboration, again, between the utility and the city, and then leadership's actions and attitude around that. So there was some concerns within that area. Staff, you can see it came up as well, community mistrust. Same concern on staff side the board has, of lack of information and support within that community mistrust is probably, in staff's mind, is what's causing a lot of that. Environmental regulations, again, same as board here. But on the environmental piece, not aligned on the Harbor Island redevelopment and what happens there. On the governance, again, very much aligned staff with board in regards to concerned about the division of the board and concerned about the city BLP relationship within that. Changing workforce, lack of skills and direction, lack of leadership and alignment moving forward, not utilizing tools and processes. And then, lack of financial funding, even though I don't believe you're in financial hardship today. I think that's always a concern, is based on everything you need to do, is the finances there to be able to do that. So those are some of the negative things, some of the things that could prevent from achieving that vision. Now we went into the SWOT. So here's strengths, and I won't do a lot on this. I think all of these, and there is a lot of alignment in regards to what strengths are between the board and staff. And so I won't spend a lot of time on these. But it was good to see, though, that alignment is there within board and staff on the strength side. Weaknesses, limitations, there were a lot more of these in regards to the feedback, and I've tried to the extent I can summarize, but also in these sub-bullets, wanted to point out some of the things that were talked about just so caught the spirit of everybody's input. Communications and community education is one of the weaknesses and limitations. Staffs recognize that as well. And I know there's things underway to help with that moving forward. But I definitely think that that's going to be part of one of your strategic priorities over the next 5 years, is your communications and community education piece, is my guess. Not trying to lead you there, but just based on everything that I've heard going through this. You can see the outreach to larger customers, education on renewables and conservation. Disruptive community contrarians without education and information. This came up directly from the board. On the governance side, the board's role, cohesiveness, again, it's coming up again. The leadership, new member orientation, personal agendas, city council encroachment, unwillingness to accept public input, lack of ongoing subcommittees. I don't think any of this probably comes as a surprise. Again, you've got a divided board. And it was very evident in the conversations that some people feel a lot different than others. And trying to work through that to the extent that you can versus agreeing to disagree on some of that is, I'm sure, what you have to and have been trying to balance out and will need to going forward as well. Rates a little higher than some would like. I like that comment, although I think probably rates are always higher than most would like. But from the standpoint of value, how does it fit in the value equation with what you're paying versus the value you're receiving? On the operations, the physical security, disaster recovery, business continuity, I think this came from as well, the report. And the board member that mentioned this had read the report. No centralized purchasing. On the leadership, that gets back to the BLP and city relationship side. Leadership as well as governance. Power supply there, you can see that. Largest customer opposition. I think that's specific to the power supply move going forward. and what's been being proposed there. Lacking the local generation reliability and backup versus being 100% dependent on the grid. Diesel plant disposal. On the staff side, you can see there communications, similar on the governance side. Financial rate constraints came up here as far as some legacy renewable contracts that are causing your prices to be up some. Unfunded pension, retire, health benefits. Sounds like you've done great in the last 5 years in getting this balanced out, but you still have some work to do. Environmental cleanup, operations, physical security, cybersecurity, lack of written policy and process. And then on the leadership workforce, this is a weakness as far as lack of experience and self-direction. I think this is, if I recall correctly, this is directly as far as you're trying to transition your workforce now into new job skills as well. And getting them the experience and the confidence to be self-directed. Senior leadership succession planning, HR policies, procedures, and input into decision-making. So opportunities. Oh, did somebody have something? Okay, all right. So opportunities on the power supply side, adding more renewables, obtaining renewable grants, and specific reference to some energy bill sections that I'm not familiar with there, but I wanted to include those as far as potential grants there. Work together with the GH Energy Group. The governance leadership workshops with board and city council, include city as a strategic planning stakeholder, improve BLP city relations. On the Harbor Island redevelopment, again, it comes back up about seeking accepting input from unbiased consultants. This is hitting, again, this divide that you have on the current power supply situation, where you go from there. Customer and community, keeping customers satisfied, especially large accounts. This came back up with your key account side. Proactive BLP messaging, toot your own horn. This is something that is an opportunity for all of public power that for too long we've kind of tried to stay below the radar, and we were positioned that if we were below the radar and out of the press, everything was good. That's no longer the case. We need to be telling our story, and if we're not, then we run the risk of somebody else telling it. And it's not factual. Be a positive community contributor, rooftop solar. On the operation side, monthly reliability reports to the board, and technology investment came out. Staff side, very similar in regards to, on the power supply though, is more about the flexibility versus getting all your eggs in one basket, is being able to have the flexibility within that to be more diversified. Workforce development, board enhancement, the Harbor Island redevelopment, operations and distribution investment there, and then the financial improvements in budgeting and costs. Threats then, customer dissatisfaction, loss of community support, failure of BLP to communicate and educate customers, legislative regulatory, the power supply uncertainty. And again, some of these have already been hit on, but as far as reliance on the grid versus backup or local generation. Interesting, these are kind of in dichotomy from the standpoint of a lack of generation with demand increase. The other one was probably too much supply and a demand decrease that you would be, which I think you've had part of that with the coal plant in the past, if I recall correctly, is that you had oversized the coal plant and it was a financial drain. Reliance on natural gas as uncertainty there. Workforce, staff leadership turnover and willingness to embrace change. And then on the governance side, again, board division, uninformed city council, and unwillingness to embrace change at the governance level as well. Staff response, customer dissatisfaction, I think very similar, what the board pointed out there. Legislative regulatory power supply, cyber physical security breach, and then again, governance. So from the standpoint of customer needs, these come as no surprise. These were all very, I think, what I would see as pretty normal across most utilities. Both staff and board reported on the reliability, the affordability, the responsiveness from a customer service standpoint, education and information, the balanced energy portfolio, local control and voice, good community stewards on the board side. And then, again, just a little bit different wording, sustainable energy options, energy efficiency programs, and transparency from the staff side. So this is where we wrapped up. This was said, okay, so if you had to say, we're based on all that said, where should you be then as far as strategic priorities moving forward? And the board said, you know, what it needs to be a strategic priority and things need to be thought of in this strategic plan are competitive rates. Of course, Harbor Island, the power supply side, with all that taken into account underneath of that there. The leadership, developing a plan for BLP city relationship improvement. Improved governance, a cohesive board, more cohesive board. Meeting environmental mandates, customer service, community awareness and support. And then industry changes in technology. And then on the operations, continuing to find more efficiencies there, specifically centralized purchasing and inventory control. The staffer side, again, besides competitive rates, is stable financial rates. Again, on the power supply side, reliable power supply. And 5 years from now, having Harbor Island, having that behind you or redeveloped, whatever the right term is there. And then a diversified portfolio with cost-effective renewables as well. A professional workforce, transition and management. And what I mean by that is that the workforce you're currently is going through has been transitioned into their new skill sets and being managed going forward. Ability to attract and retain. Leadership succession plan. Improve processes, policies, and teamwork. On the governance side is improved governance, a more cohesive board. Improve city relationship and alignment. And then enhance community engagement, more community customer outreach and education. And then you can see there too, improve technology, distribution operations, and customer service. Oh, I just wanted to get through that. I know I threw a lot at you there, but I'm not sure if any of that, I don't think any of that probably comes as a surprise, but
Tim,
yes.
will we be able to see, can you forward this to us so that we can see it in more depth?
Yes, I think that
Email it to
the
us?
slide deck, yes, the slide deck
Today?
will come out. Yes.
Good.
Yep. I'll get that. Yes, we'll get that out to you. And my apologies. I know there was a lot in here and tried to breeze through it, but out of respect. I don't, however it's distributed, I'm not sure. And Rob has it. So Rob's got it right now, so we can get that out.
I mean, Larry, just before you leave, I'd just like to add a little bit. I think it's important that y'all look at that. But I think one of the problems that we're going to experience, and this is, you know, what we're going to have to flush out here in the next couple of months, is there are certain goals both by the staff and the board that are completely diametrically opposed to each other. So because something's on that list, we as a board are going to have to, when one board member says this and another board member says that, it's pretty hard for staff to put together a long-term plan. So we're going to have to dig into the numbers a bit more on what Tim has from this and try to figure out a plan that represents the majority of the board and then take it back to you. So I think this, you know, there's definitely some challenges here that I see in this information. It gets, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Take care. We'll see you. Be careful. Okay. Yeah, and just to echo Dave's point, there definitely is, and it's no surprise to you all, there definitely is divisiveness on the board, and how to come to, I don't know if it can be resolved, but I think that's only for you all to determine. But I think being able to move forward, because to Dave's point is without that decision and without ability to move forward on some of these divisive issues, you're going to stay in place. And so that's a risk you have. And that was pointed out. And I know that doesn't come as any surprise. But let me do a quick time check. It is noon. I don't know what the lunch plans were. I was going to say we are eating, aren't we? Yes. Oh, okay. All right. Good. So let's do this then, especially for Jack and Todd. Let's, do we want to take, you're only here till 1 though. Do we want to take 30 minutes for lunch, be back here at 12:30? And then we can continue dialogue for another 30 minutes with John before he has to leave. Is that acceptable?
Then we'll continue with the other 3.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's do that then. It's just, we can do one of two things because we got behind. My apologies. We can do one of two things. We can either back up and go through then a quick overview of the process and what we're going to be doing moving forward with the strategic plan, Or we can have, if you want, we can have discussion around these, the results, so forth. I don't think we're going to come to any decisions today on the divisiveness part. I just want to make sure we're as productive as possible with the board while we have you. So that's, if we're okay with that, I'll jump back and do a real quick, boom, here's where we're going. See if there's any additional comment around that, where we're going. And then, like I said, then we'll start moving forward into the strategic plan. Is that acceptable?
Yep.
Maybe I could just, I would like to focus a little bit on our existing strategic plan.
Yes.
Because before John leaves, if we could, and that's where I would like to focus our time is because I think what we're looking at is somewhat of a rethinking of that strategic plan, but similar strategic objectives. I don't think the strategic objectives have changed that much, but to the extent that they have, I think we need to talk about that, because we would, as we start moving forward, I think we would massage our existing plan to work without a wholesale change, unless the board as a whole wants a wholesale change in it. And I think that's where we really need to, or are we just going to work within kind of that structure and make some, do people envision changes in our mission and core values and those types of things, or just more in the action plans associated with the strategic objectives, or kind of a wholesale change? And I think that's really where I'd like to focus.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that makes sense. Okay.
I'm going to check that.
Oh, so we will be back at 12:30 then, for those of you participating remote. Thank you.
That's what Jeff Door does.
So
Jeff Door heads up.
we are back. Jack and Todd, are you back with us? Okay. They're muted? Okay. Okay. Jack, Todd, can you hear me now? Okay. Jack,
I can.
okay. Hi, Todd.
Hi.
And I think Jack hopefully can hear us, but it sounds like it's on mute. Or not sounds like, I guess. I'm being told from our technologist over here. He's on mute. Okay. All right. Welcome, Lynn.
I can see him, he's trying to figure out how to use it.
Oh. Okay.
Let's get started.
Okay.
We don't have John that long.
Yeah, I want to take advantage of John's time here with us for another 30 minutes. And so what I want to do now is go through the current strategic plan at a high level. Just talk about the mission, the core values, and the strategic priorities. And so the slides here that you're now seeing, you're with me, aren't you, Rob? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I backed back up. I should have told you. The current mission statement. And let me frame too that typically what we'll see in updates of plans is unless something has significantly changed, typically mission, values, those things, and somewhat strategic priorities really remain unchanged. But they do in a lot of cases. And what really gets updated are the goals, the tactical pieces of the plan. That doesn't mean that it has to, but you should always read and relook to see if things are still the same. And that was, as Dave mentioned, that was his desire, and I agree 100% here. Before we lose John, that we go through these at a high level, and then we can have some additional dialogue around that. So your current mission statement is the GHBLP mission is to meet our customers' expectations for quality electric utility service that returns value to our customers and the community as a whole. I don't want to get into a wordsmithing session, but is there something within this that needs to be changed from when this was developed 5 years ago, 6 years ago? Or are we still good with this as the overall mission? And again, mission is, when you think about that, that's the inspiration. It's the inspiration. It's okay. We can hear you, Jack. It's the inspiration to act when you think about the mission statement. So it's really, at the highest level of your strategic plan, overarching. So I guess questioning to the board, does this still feel good? I mean, if there's some wordsmithing or something, we can take that offline, but in essence and in spirit, is this, how do you still feel about the mission statement?
Am I on?
You're on. We can hear you.
Okay. As far as I'm concerned, I think that's basically what we still feel is a mission statement, even though the industry has changed and we've added board members since then. I think that it serves us well. I'm not opposed to changes if there are any, but I'm comfortable with what we have.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Others, are we still on track here?
I'm good.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, let's move on then to the core values. And these are the current core values: work cooperatively as a team, continuously improve our performance, strive to be environmentally responsible, take responsibility for our actions, focus on safety, and serve with integrity. So when you think about, you got 6 right here, is that capturing, do you feel from a board standpoint, and again, staff chime in too, but I can talk with staff later this afternoon and tomorrow as well if there's any suggested changes within this, but you know, are these 6 areas and these, because what I see is, as I see team, I see performance improvement, I see environmentally responsible, taking responsibility for one's actions, safety, and integrity. How does that?
Any interest in adding something on wellness? A lot of organizations do that. We do not.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, that could be its own separate. I've seen it, or I could see it become part of safety, you know, focus on safety and wellness. Something like that is what I've seen from others, just for what it's worth.
Personally, I think we can have too many core values and it waters it down. I wouldn't be opposed to adding wellness to safety, because I think it is one and the same somewhat. Concern for the employees' health and welfare. But again, I think before 5 years ago, we actually eliminated a couple too. We eliminated some. We had a much broader issue and we had a much longer mission statement. And I think we spent a lot of time, the last time we did, kind of looking at the focus of being community, that we would listen to our, address the community. And I think that comes clear in our mission statement. And then these core values were somewhat ratified at that point in time. And I think, we can add to it, subtract from it, but I guess what I would like to hear from the board is if this is still online or something here, not something that we should focus on, or do we need to add something entirely different?
I would not object to taking out focus on safety. I don't see that really as core value. I see it as something different. I think that's something we work within the staff and on our programming and everyday operation rather than a core value.
Jack, how do you feel about the idea of adding focus on safety and wellness?
I think that's much better.
Broader.
Okay.
I like that.
Because I just thought safety was something that was a charge to staff, and we as a board can implement safety through our actions of funding and programming, but I'm more comfortable if you put and wellness.
I think our goal this time, and it goes back to some of the strategic issues as well, is we've established these core values, but we haven't established very well the results that we want to measure them by. So from my perspective, I think when you look at the core values, think about ways to measure and whether we actually can set a result that we would like to measure to kind of highlight that. Safety is obviously one of those things that you can measure by, lost time incidents or wellness, the wellness program. Environmental responsible, we could probably come up with some metrics in that regard and improve performance measurement. I mean, there's different things that we can measure there. So I think all those are something that we can measure, whatever. Sometimes serve with integrity. I think that's probably something that we have to measure through our customer satisfaction survey and whether they feel we're serving with integrity or not. And I have some information on that as well. But one of the questions that we ask our customers regularly is whether we're open and honest in our dealings. And I think that's a good measurement for, serving with integrity. So I think we can, more so in the next 5 years than we did in the past 5 years, but measure and provide the board some results of whether we're actually walking the walk and talking the talk. But I think we can with those measurements do that.
Well, and Dave, I'm glad you brought up the measurement. What we're seeing, and staff can work on this unless there's an objection from the board. What we're really seeing is a migration or an enhancement to the core values, where you have general categories like this, but then you have behavioral statements under each one that basically talks about how do you demonstrate. So working cooperatively as a team, great. But now come up with some behavior statements of how you do that. And so that's an exercise that I'm prepared to take staff through later and then bring that back to the board for input from you all. But it really, and the reason we like doing that now is because values always have been important, but they've never been more important than they are today for a workforce, for employees and for customers. They want to see, are their values aligned with their provider? Are their values aligned with their employer? And so especially for the younger generation, not that values aren't important to the more seasoned generations, but from the standpoint of younger generations, the value statements can really be powerful. So it's something we're seeing a lot of utilities move towards. So we can talk more about that later, just on the staff side. But I think that'll hit maybe some of the metrics you're talking about as well, that you can have those within that. Any other comments from the board on values? Like I said, staff, we can spend more time on it later. Okay, hearing none, I am going to, this last area then is on these are the current strategic priorities. And again, what you're seeing here is the area, and remember, the strategic priorities are the overarching or the buckets or the general categories of where goals are developed. So this is what needs to be addressed within the plan. And what you're seeing next to that is you're seeing what we refer to as our outcome statement, our end statement that provides a definition. So the bold first couple words are the strategic priority. We used to call these strategic areas of focus. We've changed our terminology to strategic priorities. And then what you're seeing after that is a sentence describing the outcome and the reason why that's a strategic priority. Okay. So you've got financial management. You've got customer community engagement, you have transmission and distribution, you have power supply, you have workforce, and you've got business practices and processes. And then again, you've got a general, your outcome statement thereafter. So those are the 6 areas, and I would encourage you, 6 is what we like to see as the maximum number of strategic priorities. We like 3 to 6. And while it's not a numbers game, remember, there's probably 3 to 5 goals possibly under each one of these. So if you get 7, 8, 9, 10, you could end up with 50 goals. That's way too much for an organization of any size, definitely way too much for an organization of your size. So then you start losing the prioritization and the focus. So that's why, if anything, I would challenge staff and the board to even try to condense these down from 6, maybe to 4 or 5, but definitely don't add a new area. Would be my recommendation to you all, just from a process standpoint. But how do you feel about these 6 areas? Are these still the top areas? And we can go back to those survey results. They align pretty well with the survey results from both board and staff as far as what those strategic, and again, things can fit underneath these, but as far as the broad-based buckets or the broad-based topics, how do you feel about these 6?
You're going to have to change the wording of the power supply.
Okay. And you mean as far as the good point. Good point. I'm just going to make some strike throughs here. Thank you, John. Yep. Yeah. These, and so if the 6 categories are still the top categories from the board standpoint, staff can work on wordsmithing and changing based on change and based on where we're going in the next 5 years, can work on these outcome statements and update those and bring them back for your approval.
That sounds acceptable to me.
And I apologize, but you're not going to be seeing Jack and Todd. You won't be seeing just the red lines I'm making here. Apologies on that, but you're getting the spirit of it verbally, and we'll get it to you later.
I think it's really important for all 5 board members to buy off on these. and agree that this is where our focus is going to be. Because I think if you look at our performance in the last 5 years and the goals and objectives that were established in our strategic plan, staff has met these, and I'm pretty proud of the results. Staff has worked very hard on this strategic plan, and quite frankly, the business assessment and such, it's all reflective of us performing in these areas. And we're still not given credit for the situations that the progress that we've made. And quite frankly, it's important that we let the public know this as well, because the public is saying that we're not performing in some of these areas when quite frankly we are. So I think it's important, first of all, that we buy off on these are the areas that we're going to focus on. But then secondly, as we move forward in the strategic planning, we're going to put metrics around these things and we're going to measure them. And then when we meet our goals and objectives, that we tell our staff, job well done. And I think that's important. And I think that, is reflective in a lot of the staff statements that they want to just, I think our employees want to work hard, but they want to make sure that they're working on the right things. And I think that's really what's important here. So, and that's why I wanted to spend what limited time we have with all five. I wish Larry was here as well. Is I think it's important that, we don't have to do it today, but as we go forward, that we all agree this is where our efforts are going to be placed. And I do think we've had a shift in the last 5 years, consistent with the plan, that we've shifted emphasis away from power supply and towards distribution. And that's going to be the biggest difference that we have in our next 5 years going forward, is what priorities are shifted to transmission and distribution and out of power supply. And I think that's important that we all agree on that and we all are headed in the same direction. So again, we don't have to make that decision today, but I just want to hear from you all that we're working on the right things.
Since we changed, for the most part, the entire leadership from a staff standpoint the last 6 years, it has also changed the way the utility was managed. And that change has been difficult for some because it went to a more business-like approach to the business we're in from an emotional approach, which prohibited much change. There was a lot of feeling out there in the industry. Jack and I, more than anybody, went to almost all of the national and state meetings and watched the change come in 2007 and 8 in the industry. Locally, we continue to stumble over some of that because the changes in that short period of time have been massive. And because of that massive, we have been criticized for the approach that we've taken by some. And we also were slow to realize that our community really didn't understand what we were doing. And as we've recognized that, we have been taking steps to improve upon it. But we're fighting within as much as fighting without. And I'm not sure where the blame rests for that. I just know that we're dealing with massive changes in the power industry in America. And it's very difficult for everybody. I'm not saying that it's not understandable, but I find locally that much of the comment is trying to simplify a very complex, difficult problem, and added to that ingredient locally is the problems that we're having on Harbor Island just in its condition. So I will say no more than that. I just think that this change has come so suddenly for many, and really the world deals with change poorly.
Well, I would just say, from a national, from an outside perspective, definitely agree, Jerry, in the sense that we've experienced a lot of change. in the power supply part of it and outside the power supply, definitely within the power supply. And the challenge that utilities that I see have is the balancing of, the change in power supply source so that you're not sacrificing reliability, that you're managing costs, because at least the majority, and you all recognize it, and I'm not sure, I know you do research, but typically the number one thing that customers, and again, you all know Grand Haven, I don't, typically the number one thing customers want first off is reliability. They said, we need electricity because we need to be able to power our house and get all the amenities that we have from that. Number two, typically, is affordability, that, because it doesn't matter what you pay for it if you can't get it. Number two is affordability. Number three, then, typically is the big variable. And that's where you get into the renewable side, the green, the environmental side, the customer service piece, all that. It's not but those first two, cost and reliability. And when we talk about power supply, that's got a direct impact on both of those. And so that's where we have a challenge industry-wide of balancing that out and dealing with that and being able to figure out what the appropriate balance is between cost, reliability, environmental, and customer service, and whatever the other aspects are. But that cost and reliability typically are the top two nationally. I don't know if it is here or not, but and you're always going to have a subset of your customer base that's going to rank those in different orders, may put environmental at the top. You're always going to have some of that. What I always say is, what's the majority of your customer base? What is the majority of your customer base telling you is the most important? And sometimes they don't know. To your point, it takes education, and we are trying to explain complex issues and putting that into lay person's terms so that somebody, just one of our customers that does not understand our business, nor necessarily should understand our business, how do we articulate that to them? That's the challenges that we have.
Tim, and this wasn't planned, but Jerry and I and all the senior staff here have been involved with direct customer meetings over the last month. And we provided the full board the meeting slides that we were using for that last month. But we've held probably about 30 to 40 direct customer meetings in the last month. We've also listened to the Grand Haven Energy folks on what they felt was most important. And really the first slide of our presentation is a question to the people. Is this what you're telling us? And this is what we've heard you say, and this is what you're telling us. And it's the community values. And those three items that you just brought up were the same three that we have verified through 30 to 40 customer meetings. And every time we bring them up, it's kind of like saying mom and apple pie, is fiscal stewardship, affordability, reliability, and sustainability. Those are the three things that we have said, this is what we understand your priorities to be, and this is what we're working on. And we've had a verification in almost every meeting that I've been involved in, largest customers to smallest customers, that those are the three things that they want us to work on. And you're right, when you talk to large customers, reliability and affordability is a lot more important than sustainability. And when you maybe talk to a environmental activist, they place sustainability up, but they don't neglect reliability and affordability either. So I think that's exactly where we're headed. I mean, if you put those, financial management's the first one up here. That customer engagement kind of goes to all of them, but then just transmission, distribution, and power supply have to do with reliability and cost. And then that workforce practices and business management, those again are just prudent best practices to make sure that you can tell your public that you're operating in a sound fashion. So I think the structure that we have already is consistent with what we're hearing our customers telling us is important to them. And it's also reflective in our customer satisfaction surveys. I think, again, the reliability, the value that's in our mission statement, the value of our customers. Are we getting a good product for our money? And I think the increasingly in the industry today that sustainability is a part of that kind of triad. But I think the three things that you just said are the exact same three that we verified in our customer meetings, that that's what's important to them. So.
Okay, again, I want to be respectful of John's time. I know he's got to leave here in a little bit, but I mean, anything, John and the rest of the board, good with these 6, with some rewording within that, and then again, bringing that back to the board. This is something staff can work on, the wordsmithing of the outcome statement, and then bring that back to the board in our next strategic planning meeting for your review, input, approval, and can get things to you in the interim as well.
Tim, I think it would help if we got from you via email the information that you went over earlier so that we could compare it with these specific items with the idea that we would individually get back to you before you have to bring it back to us if we have additions that we would like or changes. That would be helpful.
Great. I like that suggestion, John, and definitely we'll do that. And like I said, we'll get that. We'll get out. We won't get any of the red line that we're working on today, but we'll get out the slide deck that we went through this morning. We'll get that out, and we can get that out today or tomorrow, or I defer to staff on that. But yes, and that way you can see, and that way if you do have, to John's point, for any of the board members, if you do have, based upon the results of that survey, if you have some additional input, sooner the better, that you can provide that to us, just so we can factor that into our ongoing work. But I would just say too, nothing's being finalized here today by any means. We'll continue working it and bringing it back to you. That's the plan, unless you tell us differently.
We're not going to be finalizing this tomorrow, are we?
3 months probably.
Good.
Yeah, 3 month process. Yeah, we will have time for debating. No cussing or discussing, but we'll have time for debating.
We don't get to talk about you behind your back?
You can. Everybody else does. So you might as well. Everybody else does.
I'm sorry I have to leave, but I have other commitments, and I'd like to thank you, Tim, for all your work here on this today.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And I guess too, I want to make sure pull in and give Todd and Jack the opportunity, as again, I tend to, out of sight, out of mind is definitely a true word in this virtual meeting and format. So I want to make sure, Todd, Jack, do you have any comments or input as far as addition to what we just talked about?
No,
I like what I see.
go ahead, Todd.
All I said is, I like what I see. I like the direction.
Yeah, and I will be looking forward to receiving your information so that we can have a beginning discussion tomorrow and possibly resolve some of this.
Yes, and we'll get all those slides out. There's a lot of slides in there. So, you'll have to go about midway through the presentation to get down to the actual survey results, because we'll share everything, the industry trends, all of that we went through, as well as the summary of the business readiness risk assessment. All those slides we went through this morning will be in there.
Very good.
Okay.
For both Jack and Todd's information, the meetings that we've had with our larger customers and some other folks have all pretty much been along the same lines. Interestingly enough, they all seem happy. They would like, as everybody would, lower rates. Certainly our reliability is second to none in this state. What they have been unwilling to do, and a lot of these folks are friends of mine, long-term friends of mine, they haven't really been willing to step forward and say either way what's going on with them. They've been very quiet. That continues to come out. They just are operating their businesses during a very difficult time. And so I think they too are not unlike some others. They're not aware of all of the massive change that's come in our industry because our industry kept their mouths shut. And we watched it, Jack and Dave and I watched in both the state and national meetings, a very slow acceptance of what was happening. And then by the time recognition came, they were scrambling, and I think we're still scrambling. So, thank you.
I think to add on to that, Jerry, just, these businesses, I'm assuming, unless they're unique, have been under a lot of stress themselves over this past year in dealing with the pandemic. And all customers have. And I've, as you all probably have, I've seen a lot of companies and individuals handle that stress and the situation from one end of the scale to the other within that. And you all are going through and in the midst of some pretty big decisions because when you look, and I forget what it is here, I'm sure we had it in the organization checkup. I should have had this stat, but when you look, power supply ranges from 55% up to 80% of the customer's bill. And talking power supply and transmission, so the wholesale piece of it coming to Grand Haven or what was generated within Grand Haven historically. But so it's a big chunk of the customer's bill. So this should be a big topic. It should be a big topic for your customers, for your community, for you all. I know it is, but and I think we're maybe what's adding a little bit to the stress for you all as an organization, these decisions, is dealing with COVID at the same time. I mean, it can't help in that also. So you're dealing with a lot right now, some completely outside your control. So I only say that to offer my empathy and sympathy, I guess, is my only reason I made that comment.
Yeah, interestingly, Grand Haven was at that, when we had debt service on the plant yet, in 2016, we were at that 80% number. Actually, I think it was 82%. So when we were operating our own system and generating all the power, our cost of power was about 80%, give or take. What's that noise? So anyway, that was about the 80% number. Now we're down to that 65% number by buying it all. So that's the savings that you had. But again, it's our costs have not gone down 15% because we've shifted some of that emphasis to transmission distribution. So our rates went down about 6%, and then we shifted the rest of that over into transmission distribution. So that's the transition that we've had from going from generating ourselves to generating remotely and buying from others. It has resulted in a reduction in overall costs, but also a shifting of costs from primarily generation to local operations.
Okay. Jack, Todd, I think that you both commented that these still look good, still look practical. And so what we can do for the remainder of this time, or again, if you're fine, staff will wordsmith these outcome statements based on changes that you've experienced here and see going forward. And then again, we'll bring these back to you all. But I would like to, if we could maybe, just real quickly, I'll go through a couple more slides, which just frames of what we're up to here, what we'll be doing throughout this process, just real quickly, and then we can have more general dialogue, if that's okay. I'm going to go back into the slide deck here just to be able to blow it up. And, and again, what we're seeing here with this is these are the questions that, a strategic plan should answer. Or at least you should be asking yourself as you go through a strategic planning process within this. And it really is who you are, why you exist, the roles you play, and where do you aspire to be 5 years from now. I mean, that's the key, and even further out for that matter, but at least bringing that back within a 5-year period, who your customers are, the important things to focus on, what's going to help, what needs to be overcome. And you know, that fifth bullet there is a big one for you all. You know, it's again, it's no secret. And it came out from both board and staff that you've got a divisive governing board right now. You may or may not have some challenges with the city side of it. I think some of that's natural and always exists. But you know, what needs to overcome and what's going to help are big things that this plan and you need to have a lot of dialogue on. And hopefully this plan can help address. It's not going to be the only way to resolve some of your challenges, but it should be a way and one piece of that. What actions will take to achieve the goals, you know, staff will work on that. And then this last one, Dave's already alluded to it a couple times, is this success measurement. And how do you measure success? And while your last plan, I think, was much more tactical than it was strategic, which is logical based on where you were at 5 years ago, right? We tend to see those first-time strategic plans, especially when you've had staff changeover and you're going through something big like your power supply piece. It's going to be more tactical. Now, though, you have the opportunity for this plan to be much more strategic. And the tactics side, you should, as a governing body, you should be relying on staff on anyway. That's their job. That's why you pay them. You know, today we've spent all the time here in this discovery phase, and this is just bubble graph, just explains kind of, and there's many ways of strategic planning, obviously, but we're going to spend today, the rest of today with staff and tomorrow in this discovery phase. And this is just a bunch of brainstorming. This is a bunch of talking about all of these various areas. Again, we identified a lot going through the survey process, which will allow us to be a lot more efficient here together. But then what we're going to quickly move to is we're going to quickly move to that alignment, that focus, getting it narrowed down, and that prioritization of the current plan. I mean, that's going to be the key, is prioritizing in what this plan should be focused on, and then the action side out of it. And you may remember this one from last time when I was here, and just call this our, kind of call it our hourglass. And, but you know, we start real big. We're throwing a bunch of stuff on the wall to see what sticks. We're doing a lot of brainstorming. We're narrowing that down, prioritizing, then we get to the focus. That focus point are those strategic priorities. So those 6 that we just went through that are still valid with some enhanced or changed outcome statements, that's the fulcrum point here. Now goals underneath those will start building the plan back out. But you know, the board really being focused on that top part, staff focused on the bottom part. Not that staff can't be focused on the top part as well, but that's really from a good governance responsibility standpoint. The governance is focused on that vision, setting the strategic direction, agreeing on those priorities that are very most important, and then staff will build out the plans. You know, I think we talked about it last time, the Carver model of ends and means. Good boards focus on the ends. They stay out in front of the organization. They're the visionaries. They're helping set that vision. And then the means is staff. Staff develops the means of how to get there. And so it's just something to think about from a governance standpoint. Our process hasn't changed. We've tweaked it a little bit, but it's still an 8-step process. You know, we have been completely focused on this, going through the interview process and our discussion areas today. Parts of, obviously, number 1, we've really focused on that. And then we've touched on 2, we've touched a little bit on 3, we've touched some on 4, and we've touched a little bit on 5. But now staff will really work those between now and the next time to present to the board. Because before getting down to, and 6, excuse me, those outcome statements, I always encourage the staff not to get focused on developing goals until there is a good buy-in, and maybe you already have that, but a good buy-in from board on those strategic priorities and those outcome statements. That's critical. So that's where we ended up, you know, and this is where then we went into the board survey results. So I just wanted to squeeze that back in there. And my apologies that we ran a little long this morning, although I think it was good conversation. And we wanted to maximize our time by having John and Larry with us, knowing that they had shorter time frames with us. So with that, you know, I'll open it back up to the board and to you, Dave, in what we would like to accomplish in the next, you know, I think we've got the rest of you, I believe, the rest of the board for another 50 minutes. Is at least what we had on the agenda. We had we had them until 2, and then we were going to break, although we don't have to keep them until 2 either. That's up to you all. But we got through at least from the standpoint of what wanted to go through agenda-wise with the board.
I came from a background, a business background, where when we were hiring people, we hoped that we would hire the right people for the right job. And in the 16 years that I've sat here, I have been absolutely delighted with the staff that Dave Walters has assembled. With that said, they represented as a group change, and we have a community and some of our own board, and they and I have been over this ground way too many times. They want to micromanage a staff that they've hired to do a job, and that is very hard for me personally. I'm sharing a personal feeling. I don't understand how a board member coming from a totally different environment could ever have remote knowledge of what the folks sitting in this room have. And it has baffled me. I have tried all kinds of methods of acceptance. It hasn't worked. The majority on this board has worked very hard to educate themselves about the way the industry has moved. But we've got people who have been unwilling to do that. And I think that it will be unrealistic for us to expect that we're going to get something different there. I don't think that's in the cards, and that's okay. That's their right. They were elected by this community, and if they're speaking for this community, that's one thing. But if they have anybody who has a personal agenda, that's something different. And so I won't be here much longer this afternoon, but while I'm here, I personally am very comfortable with the direction that this utility has taken. It's in great hands. Enough said.
Maybe I'd like to kind of put 2 cents in here. It goes back to what you just said too, Tim, as well. Is I think a strategic plan is, and what we're discussing here, and maybe this is how we get consensus on the board level, is we focus less on the means and more on the end that we all want. And I think many of us can agree that we need to become more sustainable, that we need to become more reliable, that we need to have better cash management policies. We need to focus as a board and leadership on those things and agree on what we want to see, the results that we want to see, and a lot less on how we get there. And it seems like as a community, all of our discussion is whether we build this facility or whether we hire this person or whether we do things in this fashion. And there's a whole lot less looking at what the actual results are. And I think as we go into the strategic plan, if we can get the community to focus on the ends that we want to see, and quite frankly, I look at our 5-year plan and look at 5 years ago, and we all were on the same page, and we said, this is what we want to achieve, but we lost looking at the ends, right? We focused on whether we have a local coal-fired power plant or not. I mean, that was a huge decision. I'm not belittling that in any means, but that's a means to an end, shutting down a plant. Our goal is to become more economical and more sustainable and more reliable. And we achieved that, yet we still have all of this discussion about, okay, well, now what's the next thing? I have no problem talking about that, and I think we should be talking about that. But if we can reach agreement on some of the results that we want to see, then staff can work within those constraints and say, okay, well, this is how we would recommend getting there. But if it seems like we have had more focus, at least of certain members of the community, certain members on the board, with the means and not so much the ends. So if we can through the strategic process, kind of work on what we want to see, what would be a successful utility. And even when we asked the board, we said, where do you want us to be in 5 years? Most of the response that we got back was about, well, we want to see this personality conflict resolved, or this situation with council. I mean, or you know, this particular item needs to be built on Harbor Island or not built. All of the focus has been on that. And quite frankly, if you focus on the ends, I think we can get a lot more agreement. I think we can actually get to a lot more agreement and cohesiveness, and then give the staff the direction that we need. Go out and explain to the public, this is what we're doing. And quite frankly, the public, once they hear these are the ends that you're trying to get to, I think we can agree. You know, we can agree on those things. And I think that's what we should focus on in our strategic planning efforts.
And I would just add to that, Dave, I think that, and again, this is just my perception, although I think it's been confirmed based on the feedback from staff and from the board going through the interview process. And you may be right, Jerry, in the sense that the divisiveness of the board may not change and may not be able to change until board members change individually. But collectively, you know, I guess I would ask the question, it doesn't have to be answered today, if there can be some additional, whether it's training, whether it's some level of additional team building within the board, between board members and the board collectively, if that could be beneficial or not. I don't know, but you know, I think sometimes, and this is not picking on any one individual within a governing body, sometimes though, I find that boards that are not living up to their capabilities and responsibility, quite frankly, as a governing body, is because they don't exactly know what their role is. And if they do know what their role is and they still choose not to perform that role, then that's something completely different. But so many times I guess I see, and we shouldn't discuss it, especially just without the full board here, but it's just something that, you know, I'll ask staff as far as the means of how to get there. Is there some level within that governance area? Is there some training? Is there something else that staff can help the board with in regards to trying to come together more? So I agree 100% though with Dave as well, that if we can get out of how we're going to get there within the board and talk about where we need to be and where we want to be in 5 years as an organization and the BLP, I think that takes a lot of the emphasis off these individual. Now they're still going to come up because there's, you know, some people have a very heavy passion, and that's the beauty of living in this country and being able to have our own voice and being able to have our own thoughts and ideas and being able to express those. But it, again, if I'm in Dave's shoes, I'm trying to have my board that's giving me a direction of where we need to be into the future, specifically in this case for this plan, 5 years. And then the faith and trust in me that I'll bring a plan back that's going to get us there. And we'll track that progress throughout the 5 years and demonstrate we can get there. And also to Dave's point, I think that, you know, it is fine too for a community. And it really, it's very inspiring and I think uplifting to a community when they can look at the results of what you have achieved. And I don't think any of the staff's looking for, you know, pats on the back saying, oh, you guys are great and you're doing, you know, you're the best. That always helps. I don't think that's what they're looking for as much as just affirmation that, hey, we've been getting bashed here lately a little bit, but we've done a lot over the last 5 years. You know, and again, it's not that you're looking for that pat on the back saying, Dave, you're a great guy and your organization is great, as much as let's recognize what we've accomplished. Let's celebrate that. And then let's look at what we want to accomplish in the next 5 years. I think that's where, at least Dave, I think, you know, in our conversations, and that is for any general manager. I'm just picking on Dave because he's sitting here, but for any general manager, any leader of an organization, that's what they're looking for from their governing body and their community.
Here's what the problem is. we have been criticized massively for not being transparent, massively. And the interesting thing is there's a lady on this meeting who has been coming to our board meetings for 7 or 8 years. She knows more about what we've done in that time than we do probably. And so it's not that we haven't been transparent, because we've tried. But there is an element out there that feels that we're working behind closed doors. I got, and as did probably the rest of the board, get 5 or 6 things this past week from customers who said, you're operating behind closed doors. That is a very unfair opinion about what's happened here. But I understand how it happened. And we are working to solve that. However, we've been criticized for that. Now, this utility operated for 120 years without any oversight. Not saying that's good, not saying it's bad, just saying that's the way it is. 3 years ago, there's some things came up because of the changes that were occurring, and all of a sudden there was more scrutiny. That was fine, as long as it was accurate scrutiny. That's not what's happening. And it's certainly, if I were to be absolutely honest, some of the things that our detractors are saying sound logical. They sound like, yeah, I agree with that. But reality is not the same, and that's the challenge that we've had. And this 5 years that this community never will have a more important time in its soon-to-be 200-year existence than the next 5 years. So what we're doing right now is very important, but we also have to implement it. And we have to implement it bringing people along who may not necessarily want to go along.
Well, and thank you, Jerry. And my responsibility to that is number one, you're not going to please everybody. I mean, that's, if you figure out a way to do that, please share the formula on that. And number two, you're right. It's a very important decision in what you're doing, and you all are, you've had an identity, and I don't know how long it goes back, but you've had an identity of being a generator. You have generated your power, and that's been part of your brand, your image, your reputation, and you're changing that, or you've changed it at least for the current time frame. You've shut down. You're not generating locally, and so with that, we talk about change, and we talk about image, and we talk about what people's thoughts are. You know, that's just not probably on BLP. That was probably a community, a Grand Haven overall image or brand as well. Hey, we generate locally. We have control or perceived control of our generation. You know, the lights are always going to be on here because we've got that coal plant sitting here. And what I find interesting, and I remember going through this with Traverse City 7, 8 years ago, is that a little bit of a misperception because of not understanding how the utility space works, that just because now you have a generation unit in your service territory doesn't mean that if the grid goes down or the lights go out or generation's lost elsewhere, that you can utilize all that, because you're part of a system now that really, even though you may own it, it's outside of your control to a certain extent of how you use it, because it's part of a greater system. And you all are MISO, right? So you're at the mercy of MISO, and I'm not an expert, please correct me if I'm wrong, staff, on this, but you're at the mercy of MISO on how you can even utilize your own generation, because the other market has a right to that, because you are part of that market. And is that a fair statement at a high level? So I think there's also misperception on, if we have local generation, we've got higher reliability because we're always going to have access to all that output. And that's not the case any longer. And again, I'm not an expert in that space, but that's my understanding with that. But I think, I think another challenge, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think another challenge that you all have is, first off, we in the utility space have not been good. I'm just generalizing, not talking about BLP specifically. We've not been good in communications and education to our customer base historically. We have been trying to improve on that in general. So I'm assuming you all are in that same boat with the rest of the industry, but now you've got another added piece that even requires more communication and education. That is your power supply transition, that you're transitioning from that local generation to something. And so with that, you have I'd say an increased or a multiple challenge that, even the rest of our industry is not dealing with as much, just because you're at a transition and a crossroads point of what you're doing on the power supply side. So I think that I'm not making excuses, bigger challenges than most, just because of one, we're all trying to get up to speed on communications and educations like other retail providers provide. And two, you've got a significant change, to your operations and to your power supply, which impacts your customers. So I'll get off my soapbox, sorry, but that's Jack, Todd, we have been dominating here at BLP's headquarters. I'd like to give you all a chance to chime in and say something as well.
Go ahead, John.
Well, am the newest member to the board, but I do understand what Jerry, speaks of with what the board, and the people we represent are all about. What I've been finding is, just a group of individuals who just take the positives in some of the things that the board's been trying to move forward on, and they just take parts that they want to mislead certain other folks with, like capacity and renewables. And it's like whenever we try to, the whole story needs to be told. And I don't think, the board, we've been doing, a good job at getting, the public to quite get up to speed on where we're at with all of this.
Well, I would say to that, Todd, that's another area that in good governance, good governing boards are proactive in advocating on behalf of the entity that they're governing, and should not be reactive. And also from the standpoint of communications, and I guess I would put this back on staff. Staff has a responsibility to the board of providing those talking points. And it's not that the board doesn't have individually some level of independency, but staffs, and maybe your staff's doing this, is giving you the talking points and saying, here are the success stories. Here is what we're working on. Because I like to, it's kind of the old, remember the old secret shoppers? That if I went around and went into a store and asked the same question of 5 different people that work there, a question, what answers would I get? It's the same thing that a customer can do and sometimes do with governing bodies of public power utilities, and that is go around and ask all 5 of you a question. And how would those 5 answers vary? Would they be in sync? Would they get the same answer, or would they get 5 different answers? So, when you think about what a board's role is, it should be proactively advocating on behalf of the asset that they're governing. That's just good governance. And to your point, it's easy to react. It's easy not to tell your story. And I say you, not individually. I'm talking about collectively, the BLP. And proactively advocating on behalf of that. The other thing that within that communication is good governing bodies, even though every organization has negative aspects and negative events, they speak to the positives because you should not within good governance as well be discrediting the entity that you're governing. If you've got an issue, you should be resolving that internally and not being out undermining or cutting the legs out underneath of your organization. I'm not saying that's happening here, but I've seen that happen in other places. And that shouldn't be occurring either. because that's not good governance.
My feeling is, over the past 5 or 6 years, maybe even more, as a board, as we've looked at the changes that we're facing at that time and at this time, we also were trying to see if we could get a unanimous support from all board members. I think we spent too much time worrying about that rather than zeroing in on, here are the critical issues that we face, and we must face them and we must move ahead. So my question would be, at what point do we take that type of action? We've chosen not to be just a handful of people pushing to a result, but try to bring others with us. But I think we're rapidly reaching the point where if we continue to do our job in informing the people, educating people, saying probably more resolutely that we are convinced we're on the right path and this is the way to go, and we are going. I think we have to get to the point where after this process is completed and we have a chance to share all of this with the community, we have to, as a board, make final commitments, irresponsible of how many people we have in support. Not worry about 1 or 2 that may not. Try and get them to go with us. If they don't, I think then we reach the point where we have to move. And personally, that I feel strongly that we have to keep the ball rolling, and we have to do our job in all aspects. But we're rapidly approaching a time when we do have to make final decisions, and then we'll have that behind us. But we have to keep moving ahead. We can't get stalled, and ultimately, the majority of the board's going to have to make a decision and make it happen.
I don't want to take any time from the board. So if the board has additional comments, I would like to just raise one. We have about a half hour here left. So I do want to focus the board's attention in one particular area. And do we have anything else we need to cover with the board in your deck? One of the things that we do every year, and I think we've been using that effectively in our planning efforts, is our customer satisfaction survey. And normally we have our customer satisfaction survey done in December of the year. It's a good time to do a phone survey, and we've been very effective in doing that. And then we get the results in January, and typically at your January meeting, I forward to you the results of the customer satisfaction survey. We just got it yesterday, so tomorrow is not going to have this, but in February you'll be getting the customer satisfaction survey. But I did spend some time last night and this morning kind of just looking at trends in that information. And, I think what is going to be evident to the board is that over the last year, rightfully or wrongfully, we have experienced a degradation in our satisfaction from our customer base, right? And it seems like that would be understandable given the fact that we have this group out there that's publicizing stuff about us. But one of the things that's really interesting, and one question that we've asked for 5 years, for 4 of the 5 years now, and we don't always ask the same survey every year. So, but we did ask a question of our customer base. One of the questions that we have is from 1 to 10, 1 being very good, 10 being very poor. Does the BLP maintain a modern and reliable infrastructure? All right. This to me would be, are we using the best technologies? Are we keeping our assets new, refurbished, maintained? Are we on top of things? And if you remember back 5 years ago when we did our original organizational checkup, one of the things that we were hit very hard on was our technology implementation and our maintenance, power plant and our distribution system were very old. And we, in the last 5 years, have substantially increased the efforts. They're reflective in our average age of assets, the technology that we've implemented, all of that stuff. We have made light years, strides beyond all hope. And I think that's what Hometown Connections was saying, is that we have really achieved a lot of success in that fashion. But when we ask our customers this question, in 2016, 80% of our customers that responded said we did maintain a modern and reliable system, when in actuality, we did not. And we kept that high rating for 3 years, 80%, 81%, 82%. In other words, when we asked our customers that question in 2016, 2017, 2018, if the BLP maintains a modern, reliable infrastructure, and we were for the most part reliable, but it wasn't very modern. All right. This year we asked that same question, and we had a 13.4% customer degradation in their response. In other words, the average went well down. So in other words, by having all these customers out there, saying, geez, the BLP isn't doing this right, it generally reflected on us that we no longer maintained a modern, reliable system, when quite the opposite is proven factual. In other words, we have gotten a lot more reliable, a lot more modern. We can show the data, we can demonstrate it, but somehow through that whole process, rather than for our customers to get the truth that we are actually now maintaining a more reliable, more modern system, we now get the customer feedback from our customers that suggests, no, you're getting worse. So what that points to me, and I think it should point to all of us, is we aren't doing a very good job of getting our message out to our customers, which actually has been for those on the board, except for Jerry, because Jerry's been involved in a lot of these meetings. Most of our customers don't understand what we've done in the last 5 years. All right. Our largest customers in particular. So I think customer engagement, customer education, which is one of our main goals. We definitely need to improve in that area. We have hired a communication firm to help us with that, and we get criticized for that. But it's obvious that our customers are not getting the information that's actually happening, at least in that particular question. So we'll talk more about that customer satisfaction survey next month. I mean, there's some real revealing stuff in that information, but clearly, I think we need to improve in that area, and that would be one of those results that I would think we need to improve on.
My comment is the comments that I hear from the community, they equate the quality and the industry, and especially us, with a factory, a facility on the island. And everyone who has questioned me about where are we at, etc., equates it to the fact, well, you don't have that generation plant anymore. What are you going to do? So I think a portion of what you're seeing in the degradation of the results of the survey is that for some of our longtime citizens, the entire Board of Light and Power revolved around a generating plant, and we do not have it now. And the industry has changed so dramatically and so rapidly, and we have been suspect in getting all of that information to the people, that would be part of the reason that you have a degradation. I don't think it reflected on the board, or especially on our employees and management. The people I talk to and who call me up and talk to me tell me that once they saw that plant go, they figured the BLP was gone. So I think that's part of our information that we have to get out there, is there's no relationship between the two.
I think, Jack, those are very good comments, and again, it's part of your identity historically, that generation plant. And, you know, it's a big change for not just the BLP, but for the community overall. And it's good change, especially if you're concerned about the environment. It's good change. And that even had some additional challenges besides the environmental piece based on its size and its price competitiveness in the market, if I recall correctly. But, you know, I think that, you know, to Dave's point is that, you know, you have to be out there telling your story, and you're going to have to repeat it multiple times because in this day and age, you know, it takes a long time for something to sink into the community overall. I mean, you're going to be able to educate individuals in one-on-one meetings, but in your messaging and probably as you already knew or learning, you as an organization from your outside partner or consultant in the public relations space is it's going to take multiple platforms. It's going to take a while, and it's not going to happen overnight, but you definitely have some upside now on repairing that image in what these recent results are. It sounds like that, you know, I'm assuming will be part of your metrics moving forward and how effective you are in communicating out your reliability, your infrastructure quality, all of that. So it's not unnatural to go through this, I guess. Not that that's heartening for you all, but when you go through this big a change, nobody likes change. And again, I think you may have heard me say before, I don't know too many people that get up in the morning and say, oh, I'm so excited, I'm going to change today. I just can't wait. I'm going to change. That's just not in our human nature for the most part. So, but it needs a heavy emphasis. That is critical, and it's going to take everybody. It's going to take the board. It's going to take staff. It's going to take developing champions in the community that you either have today or will have in the future that will advocate on your behalf as well. It's going to take a village, as the saying goes, and you'll get there. And fortunately, you started in a real good place. So, you know, even though you've dipped, your results are still pretty darn good. Even though that, but I know it hurts, and it is definitely has a negative impact in the short term. But going back to the transparency, and I think Jerry mentioned this, you all know this, but of the three segments of our industry, when you look at the investor-owned community, you look at the cooperative community, and then you look at the community-owned, municipal-owned community. When you look at those three, and of course we're the latter, we are by far the most transparent. You can't go into an investor-owned board meeting. Most co-ops, you cannot go into their board meetings. Those are closed sessions, all of them, not just things that are personnel related or confidential, but everything is. So the public, the beauty of what this community has, it has a voice, it has local control, it has a vote that it would not get similar or at all if the customer were served by an investor-owned utility or a co-op. So I think from the standpoint of, now, obviously the perception's reality in people's minds, but you know, the customer base also not sure how well educated they are on local control and the type of governance that this board has, that it is owned locally. And sometimes we take that for granted. We think everybody knows that when in essence they don't. They should know more here because your board members are elected. So, you know, you would think you'd have a higher rating in that. I'm not sure if you asked that in your survey or not. Do you know that you own the utility? But it's a question that, you know, is sometimes we just kind of gloss over being within the industry, and we don't put enough credence on and remind people that they own us, that, you know, that the customers own this utility. It's much different than the other sectors.
I'd like to break in here just a minute and say that the criticism directed at us in regard to hiring a communication firm became necessary for us because in November and December, this oversight committee, or Grand Haven Energy, had letters that were being printed in the newspaper. We, as a board, put out a few responses that the Tribune was unwilling to print. And so as a result, what Dave's information today tells me is that probably what skewed the report this year as opposed to other years is the age of the person responding. In other words, because of what's printed in the Tribune in November and December, were predominantly those of us that have been around a long time. I think young people just go to their phone, go to their iPad, would have no idea what. So I think the response this year came from probably the long-term residents, not all, but many. So we then determined that our message wasn't even close to getting out into the public. And there will be more to follow, if for no other reason, just we want people to know what we're doing. We're not operating behind closed doors. That's insane. That we simply are not. Thank you.
Just a time check. We've got about 15 minutes of our allotted time that we had scheduled with the board. I don't want to just keep you if there's no other matters that are worthy of discussion in this session. So as a facilitator, want to turn it back to the three board members that are still on the call along with Dave and see if there's anything else within these 15 minutes or if we want to go out and close out the session with the board.
Well, Tim, maybe you want to spend just a moment. I think we started with this, but maybe we should end with it as well, as kind of what the process is that we're going to go through here now. We're going to spend some time with you and the staff. And then the next 3 months we'll be making progress and updating the board. But maybe you just want to highlight that again, just so if there's any questions on that, how the board can get their input into the process. We will be talking about it at board meetings, but I think it's just as important to kind of get that input as quickly as it's received. You know, John talked about reviewing the deck again when he gets home, that sort of thing. That's fine. But just how they can remain stayed involved in this process going forward.
A good point, Dave. And you know, again, the intent here and the plan is that game of catch, if we can visualize that again, and that is that I'll be here for the rest of today and tomorrow before the board meeting. I know you have a board meeting tomorrow. And we will continue to noodle on this, if you will, internally with staff. And then what's going to happen is an update to the board thereafter of some of the work that's been done. And then before the next time, and we need to set this, but before the next time with the board, getting you an update of exactly what all work's been done, because there'll be work that occurs after I leave, at least better be, I hope, between now and the next time we're together. And then the next time with the board, really want to get provide an update of the mission, which it doesn't sound like there's any changes right now unless staff has some they want to propose to the board for next time. The core values, potentially some behavior statements or some subsets within those values areas. We're going to also then take into account the updated SWOT, the customer needs side, all the way through any changes to the strategic priorities and the outcome statements. We'll keep all of that in red line so that the board can see any changes that have been made, and then bring that back to the board for their input. Because again, before moving too far down the road on getting goals of actually the tactical side of the plan to achieve that vision and work those strategic areas with those outcomes and end statements in mind, want to make sure that we've got the board approved in moving that forward. So that'll be the next step. Thereafter then is when the goal development will occur, the means as an example of that, the means of getting there. And then that goal development will occur. And then that'll be brought back to the board as well, you know, as far as finalizing the plan itself. So that's the timeline. I defer to Dave on that as far as what staff's capacity is to work this. The good news is not starting from scratch this time. That, you know, as Dave mentioned, just updating at least to the strategic priorities, updating the current plan that you have in place, making those necessary changes. And then on the goals side, really, there'll be some efforts in the goals side, that means side, because most of that all got worked off. There may be some that still carryovers that may still stay in part of the plan, but from that standpoint. And then this time too, hearing, at least in conversations I've had with everybody, is really too putting in place a good, and we recommended this within the business readiness assessment, while my colleague Sharice calls it the scorecard. I like the scorecard concept. We're not necessarily tied to that, but some level of corporate reporting or higher level reporting. I think you all have really improved, if I recall correctly, in your financial reporting. And I think you have a good financial scorecard, I believe, in place based on our assessment this time. Now, if you take, besides just the financial side, if you take all the other aspects of the organization and have some kind of similar reporting method that then can get aggregated up and get some, the corporate world, key performance metrics, the balanced scorecard, whatever it is, but getting to that level of reporting to the board on progress and status for these other areas. Not that you're not reporting on anything other than financial. I don't mean to hit the other parts of the organization on that, but something where you bring together a consolidated metric update that's consistent that the board gets used to seeing. That'll be, I think, another output of this plan also. So that, Dave, is what I would see from the facilitation side.
I would just add to that is I think what we'll plan on doing is having a report on your February and March agenda on what progress we've made. And I don't know if there's interim votes or not, but there'll be a time for the board to react. I think it's important that we don't get to April and then we present you a plan and the board goes, oh, well, you missed the mark. I mean, what we're going to be trying to do is update you, every month for the next 2 months. And then, we'll respond, we need your honest assessment at that point in time and spend a little time looking at whatever information we provide at that point in time. And to the extent that we don't talk about it in February and March, and then when April comes around, we just go, oh, geez, I'm going to vote no on this because I don't like this segment or whatever. I think we need to avoid that happening. So let's have productive, it probably won't be the majority of those meetings, but it'll be some of those meetings dedicated towards just kind of reviewing a status report on what we've done. Maybe, and hopefully we'll have a good progress report in February and March, and then a return in April to the full plan and an update provided and probably some sort of ratification late in April. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I think it's a very reasonable time frame for an update because we won't have to do as much work and spend as much time as we did last time in developing the original plan. Okay, so Jerry's got his mask on, so I think that's a very visible indication that we're just about done here. Todd, Jack, anything else from your side?
Well, I'd only say this much. And, I'd love to process strategic planning, 5-year. Some of the issues that were brought up, actually, you had to blackline them. I just have concerns with, waiting for the process to take place before maybe some of these high risk items are addressed. I mean, in the intern of this, that was brought forward, I hopefully we're gonna, we can start, or staff could start to maybe look at addressing some of these issues without, needing a green light from, the process.
I think that's a real good point, Todd. And what I think, and again, I don't want to put too much emphasis on that redaction because that wasn't something that is redacted, but necessarily because of a glaring weakness. It was more redacted just based on exposing something, that could be detrimental based on bad actors out there. So that's my first comment. The second comment, exactly to your point, that is, some of this, and staff even admitted, and I think we talked about that I know we talked about it in certain spots in the report. Staff admitted that some of this was already being worked on. It just wasn't finalized and completed. So when we talk about some of this process, possibly some of even the policy some of the actions. Some of it's underway. So it's not, I don't think staff's going to hit the pause button and wait till this strategic plan's in place. And quite frankly, the strategic plan, some of what we included in that report too is very tactical and may not even show up in the plan because it's going to be below or down in the weeds, if you will, on the means of how to get there. And it'll be covered in more of a strategic way within the plan itself. But I think to your point, I think you can rest assured, at least my understanding, you know them a lot better than me, but my understanding of the staff is they're not going to wait when something needs to be done immediately. They're not going to hold off waiting for this plan to be approved by the board, I do not believe. But I don't want to speak on Dave's part.
I think, Todd, maybe you don't have that. Well, actually, you do because you were here. But when we had the organizational checkup, I think there was about 80 recommendations in the first organizational checkup. And I think when we went back and looked at them, I think we started action plans on almost every one of those items. Some formal, some not so formal. But we will be addressing these issues, whether they're in our strategic plan or not. All right. I think that they're two separate things. We've tied them together here, but our strategic plan isn't a direct response to the business risk assessment. It's part of it. It's not the whole thing. Just like our strategic plan wasn't necessarily, some of the items that were in our organizational checkup didn't appear anywhere in our strategic plan. They didn't raise to that level. That didn't mean we just put them on the shelf and didn't work on them. So we'll be implementing, measures to address those business risks and considerations and opportunities, regardless of whether they're included in our strategic plan or not. But it does give you another data point to use in setting, what those major goals are going to be. And I might liken it to in the technology side, we've identified a quote risk that, maybe we need to put more focus in our IT area, which is quite frankly, the exact same thing they said 5 years ago. And we've improved, but we're just not quite there yet. So we need to continue to place a high priority on improving our capabilities in that area. So we're going to be doing that. It's kind of a workforce issue sub-plan, regardless of whatever workforce issues are identified in our strategic plan. We'll still, have a focus on improving our IT capabilities. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
I would look for a motion to adjourn the board portion of this meeting.
So moved.
I support.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
You bet.